Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the fascinating world of the Anasazi, where you'll imagine living in homes carved into the sides of cliffs high above the desert floor. Picture this, you're standing on a narrow ledge hundreds of feet above the canyon floor with the wind whispering through the pinyon pines. Below, the landscape stretches out in a tapestry of reds and browns, while above the blue sky seems almost within reach. You're about to enter a world where the earth itself is your home, a place where ancient hands shaped stone into shelter, and where every day was a balancing act between survival and wonder. But don't get too comfortable. Life in these cliff dwellings wasn't all scenic views. You'd have to climb ladders to get home-haul water up from the springs below, and always be on guard against the elements and potential threats. It was a tough life, but one filled with ingenuity and resilience. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. It's always fun to see how widespread our bedtime stories reach. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you settle in, imagine it's the year 1200 CE, and you're part of the ancestral Puebloan people known today as the Anasazi. For centuries, your ancestors have lived on the flat mesas, farming and building their lives in the open. But something has changed. Perhaps it's the increasing raids from neighboring tribes, or maybe it's the unpredictable weather that's making life on the mesas less secure. Whatever the reason, your people have decided to move to the cliffs. These towering sandstone walls offer natural protection, hiding your homes from prying eyes and making them harder to attack. It's a bold choice, but one that will define your way of life for generations. Let's start by understanding who the Anasazi were. The term Anasazi is actually a Navajo word meaning ancient enemies or ancestors, but today they are more respectfully called the Ancestral Puebloans, as they are the ancestors of the modern Pueblo peoples like the Hopi and Zuni. These people thrived in the high desert of the American Southwest for centuries, developing sophisticated farming techniques, intricate pottery, and remarkable architecture. The land they called home was harsh and beautiful, with deep canyons, flat mesas, and arid deserts. Yet they managed to make it bloom with their crops of corn, beans, and squash, known as the Three Sisters. They built their lives around water sources like springs and rivers, and their settlements ranged from small pit houses to large multi-story pueblos. But perhaps their most iconic creation is the cliff dwellings, entire villages built into the sides of cliffs, seemingly defying gravity. These structures weren't just homes, they were fortresses, granaries, and sacred spaces all carved out of the living rock. The story of the ancestral Puebloans spans over 1,000 years, from around 1200 BCE to 1300 CE. They are divided into several periods: the basket maker period, where they were primarily hunter-gatherers; the Pueblo 1, 2, 3, and maybe 4 periods marked by increasing sedentism, agriculture, and architectural complexity. It was during the Pueblo 3 period from about 1150 to 1300 CE that they built the famous cliff dwellings. Some of the most famous cliff dwellings are found in Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado, including Cliff Palace, the largest cliff dwelling with over 150 rooms and 23 kivas, balcony house known for its hard-to-reach location, and square tower house with its distinctive tower. These sites are not only architectural wonders but also time capsules, preserving the daily lives of their inhabitants through artifacts like pottery tools and even human remains. One interesting fact is that the ancestral Puebloans used turkey feathers to create warm clothing and blankets. They also had dogs which they raised for meat and as companions. Their pottery is another hallmark of their culture. Made from local clays and decorated with black on white or polychrome designs, their pots were used for cooking, storage and trade. Some pieces even depict scenes from their daily lives or spiritual beliefs. However, one of the great mysteries surrounding the Anasazi is why they abandoned their cliff dwellings around 1300 CE. Historians still debate whether it was due to prolonged drought, increased violence between groups, disease, or social and religious changes. Archaeologists are still piecing together the evidence to understand this significant migration. Visiting a cliff dwelling today is like stepping into another world. At Mesa Verde, as you approach Cliff Palace, you're greeted by the sight of sandstone walls blending seamlessly with the cliff face. The scale is immense, with rooms and kivas nestled into every available space. It's a testament to human ingenuity and adaptability. Constructing these dwellings required immense effort. The builders quarried sandstone from the canyon walls, shaped it into blocks and hauled them up to the construction sites. Mortar was made from a mixture of soil, water, and ash, and wooden beams were used for support and roofing. The entire process was labor-intensive, involving the whole community. I have to admit, just thinking about living in a cliff dwelling makes me a bit dizzy. I'm not great with heights, so climbing up and down ladders multiple times a day. No, thank you. But then again, maybe after a while it becomes second nature, like riding a bike or in this case, scaling a cliff. Can you imagine trying to move furniture into a cliff dwelling? No elevators, no moving companies. Just you, your family, and a lot of determination. As we begin this exploration, let's keep in mind that these were real people with real lives, hopes, and dreams. They faced challenges we can only imagine, but they also found joy and meaning in their world. Through this script, we'll try to bring their story to life, so you can experience a bit of what it was like to be part of the Anasazi community. As you stand on the edge of the cliff looking out over the vast expanse, you realize that this land is both a challenge and a gift. The ancestral Puebloans, whom you met in that dizzying moment on the cliff ledge, chose this rugged terrain for a reason. It's a place where the earth tells stories in layers of rock, where the sky feels close enough to touch, and where every drop of water is a treasure you'd guard with your life. You're not just standing in a desert. You're in the heart of the four corners where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico meet, a crossroads of geography and history that shaped the Anasazi's world. Picture the landscape stretching out before you, deep canyons carved by ancient rivers, their walls glowing with reds, oranges, and yellows that shift with the sun's arc. Flat-topped mesas rise like islands in a sea of sand, their edges sharp against the horizon. The desert sprawls endlessly, dotted with sagebrush and cacti that seem to defy the odds of survival. The colours here are alive soft pastels at dawn, fiery hues at sunset, and a golden glow when the midday sun hits just right. It's beautiful, sure, but don't be fooled, this place doesn't mess around. You'd need to be as tough as the sandstone to call it home. The climate is arid with rainfall often less than 10 inches a year. That's barely enough to keep a cactus happy, let alone a whole community. Yet the Anasazi made it work. You spot a small spring trickling from a canyon wall, a lifeline in this parched land. They built their homes near these springs and seeps, ensuring water was never too far away. They also got clever with what little rain they had, constructing check dams and terraces to capture runoff from sudden storms. These simple structures turned barren slopes into fields where they grew corn beans and squashed the three sisters that fed their families. Imagine hauling water up those cliffs we talked about last time. One wrong step and your day's supply is a puddle at the canyon's bottom. Talk about a workout. As you walk through a narrow canyon, the walls tower above, offering cool shade and a break from the relentless sun. The air is still almost reverent, and you can see why the Anasazi felt a spiritual connection to this place. The sandstone walls are perfect for building soft enough to carve strong enough to last centuries. They shaped it into blocks mixing soil water and ash to create mortar that held their homes together. Wood was harder to come by. Pinon pines and junipers were scattered across the landscape, but every beam was a precious resource. You can almost hear the echo of their tools chipping away at stone as they built homes that seemed to grow from the cliffs themselves. But this land wasn't just about survival, it was about beauty and meaning. As you explore, you notice petroglyphs and pictographs etched into the canyon walls. Spirals, snakes, bighorn sheep, and figures that look suspiciously like they could star in a sci-fi flick. Some of these carvings have sparked wild theories about alien visitors, because you know nothing says ancient astronaut like a stick figure with a big head. More likely, archaeologists say these are depictions of shamans, spirits, or animals tied to their beliefs. Historians still argue whether these artworks were purely decorative or served a deeper purpose like calling for rain or marking sacred sites. Whatever their meaning, they're a reminder that the Anasazi found ways to express themselves even in a land that demanded so much. Let's zoom in on some key places. Chaco Canyon in New Mexico was a hub of their culture with massive great houses like Pueblo Bonito, some with hundreds of rooms aligned with the sun and stars. These weren't just homes but centers for trade ceremonies and maybe even a bit of ancient politics. Roads stretched out from Chaco connecting communities across miles of desert. Then there's Mesa Verde in Colorado, where those cliff dwellings you're picturing like Cliff Palace, with its 150 rooms cling to the canyon walls. The elevation here varies wildly from 4,000 feet in the valleys to over 10,000 on the highest mesas, affecting everything from temperature to what plants could grow. Speaking of plants, the flora here is tough as nails. Pinon pines and junipers offer wood nuts and berries while sagebrush and cacti hold their own in the dry soil. Animals like rabbits, deer, and turkeys roamed the land, providing food and materials. Turkeys remember those feathers we mentioned for blankets. They were a big deal. You can almost imagine a kid chasing a turkey through the sagebrush only to trip over a cactus. Ouch, hope they had good sandals. This landscape wasn't just a backdrop. It was a partner in their survival. Every spring, every stone, every tree played a role. As you wander, you hear the faint crunch of gravel underfoot, the whisper of wind through the canyon, and maybe if you listen closely, the echoes of the Anasazi shaping stone planting seeds and carving their stories into the rock. This land taught them resilience, ingenuity, and a deep respect for the world around them, and it's pulling you into their story too. You're wandering through the vast sun-scorched deserts of the southwest around 1200 BCE among the early ancestors of the Anasazi, known as the basket makers. The air is dry, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and dust, and the horizon stretches endlessly, broken only by the flat tops of mesas and the jagged edges of canyons. You're a nomad, part of a small band of hunter-gatherers, always on the move. Your days are spent tracking deer, rabbits, and prairie dogs across the rugged terrain, your spear at the ready, its tip glinting in the sunlight. You gather pinyon nuts, wild seeds, and the ripe fruit of the banana yucca, stuffing them into intricately woven baskets slung over your shoulder. These baskets, crafted from yucca fibers or flexible willow, are your lifeline, carrying everything you need to survive. No wonder they call you basket makers. Your weaving skills are practically an art form. Imagine trying to pack for a move with just one basket. Good luck fitting your entire life in there without a few strategic knots. But something's shifting in your world. Around 500 BCE, you notice some of your kin lingering longer in certain spots near springs or fertile patches of land. They've learned a new trick, one that's about to change everything: planting seeds. Corn, a hardy crop traded from Mesoamerican cultures far to the south, is the star of the show. You watch as they clear small plots, scratching the earth with sticks to plant these precious kernels. The first green shoots are a marvel, promising food that doesn't require chasing across the desert. Corn can be dried, stored, and eaten year-round, unlike the fleeting berries or game you've relied on. It's a game changer, and you can feel the excitement as your group starts to settle, trading the endless wandering for a chance at stability. Honestly, who wouldn't want a break from hauling baskets up and down canyons all day? This shift to farming brings new demands. You need homes that last longer than a season. You join others in digging pit houses, shallow circular structures sunk into the ground with roofs of logs, branches, and packed earth. Step inside one, and it's like entering a cozy cave. The thick walls keep the desert's scorching days at bay and trap warmth during chilly nights. You can almost smell the roasting corn on the fire. Hear the soft crackle of burning wood and feel the comfort of gathering with your family to share stories. These pit houses are practical, but they're not exactly spacious. Try hosting a dinner party in one, and you'd be elbow to elbow with your guests. Still, they're a step up from sleeping under the stars with a rock for a pillow. As centuries pass, you see your people's way of life evolve. By 500 CE, the basket maker culture is giving way to what archaeologists call the Pueblo Wen period. Your homes are no longer just pits in the ground. You're building above-ground structures using stone and adobe to create small villages. These early pueblos are modest but sturdy, clustered together like the first sketches of the grand cliff dwellings you'll see later. You've also mastered pottery crafting vessels for cooking, storing grain, and even trading with neighbours. The clay pots shaped by skilled hands are both practical and beautiful, some etched with simple designs that hint at the artistry to come. Trade networks are growing too, bringing new types of seeds like beans and squash to complement your corn and exotic goods from far-off lands. You can imagine the buzz when a trader arrives, their pack laden with colourful pottery or rare shells like getting a delivery from some ancient Amazon. Let's pause for a quirky tidbit. Those turkeys we mentioned back in the cliff dwellings, they were a big deal even in these early days. Not only did your people raise them for meat, but they also prized their feathers, weaving them into blankets and clothing. Picture wrapping yourself in a turkey feather blanket, soft and light as a cloud, perfect for those cool desert nights. It's like the ancient equivalent of a high-end down comforter, but with a lot more gobbling involved. Here's where things get debated. Historians still argue over why your people transitioned so successfully from nomads to settled farmers. Was it just the arrival of corn and better farming techniques? Some suggest a period of wetter climate made agriculture more reliable, with springs flowing more steadily and rains nourishing crops. Others point to growing populations which demanded a stable food supply to support larger communities. Maybe it was a mix of both, or even cultural exchanges with neighbouring groups that sparked new ideas. Whatever the cause, this shift laid the foundation for a complex society, one that would eventually build those awe-inspiring cliff dwellings clinging to the canyon walls. As you stand among these early settlers, you feel the weight of their choices. They've traded the freedom of the open road for the security of a home, the uncertainty of the hunt for the promise of a harvest. The land around you hums with possibility. Every planted seed, every new home, every traded pot is a step towards something greater. You're witnessing the birth of a culture that will leave its mark on the Southwest, one that will echo through the canyons and mesas for centuries to come. You're standing in a dusty clearing in the Four Corners around 500 BCE. The sun warming your shoulders as you watch a group of ancestral Puebloans plant corn in neat rows. The air is alive with the scent of freshly turned earth, mixed with the sharp tang of sagebrush from those rugged landscapes we wandered through last time. Your hands itch to join them, to feel the soil crumble between your fingers. This isn't just farming. It's a revolution, a moment when everything changes for these people you've come to know as the Anasazi. Corn, a strange new crop traded from far-off Mesoamerican lands, is taking root and, with it, a whole new way of life. You're witnessing the shift from wandering hunters to settled farmers. And let me tell you, it's as big a deal as swapping a flip phone for a smartphone. Except, with more dirt and fewer notifications. Let's talk about why corn is such a game changer. Unlike the wild seeds and game your ancestors chased, corn is reliable. You plant it, water it, and with a bit of luck, you've got food that can be dried and stored for months. You watch a woman carefully place kernels in the soil, her movements precise like she's tucking in a child. She's not alone. Others plant beans and squash alongside a trio known as the Three Sisters. This isn't just a catchy name, it's a brilliant system. The corn stalks grow tall, giving beans a pole to climb. The beans, in turn, enrich the soil with nitrogen like nature's fertilizer. And the squash, its broad leaves spread out, shading the ground to keep it moist and weed-free. You can almost hear the plants high-fiving each other, working together to feed the village. This trio means surplus food, something your nomadic kin could only dream of. That surplus is everything. With food stored in clay pots, you're not scrambling for every meal. You see families settling down their lives, no longer tied to the migration of deer or the ripening of berries. This stability lets your village grow more mouths to feed, sure, but also more hands to work. You help dig pit houses, those cozy earth-covered homes we mentioned before, their roofs keeping out the desert's scorching days and chilly nights. The sound of grinding corn fills the air, a steady rhythm, as women turn kernels into flour on flat stones called metates. You can't help but smile imagining trying to grind corn yourself and ending up with more dust on your face than in the bowl. Let's just say it takes practice. Here's a quirky tidbit to chew on. These folks weren't just eating corn tortillas or mush. They roasted cobs over open fires, and some kernels would pop and burst, scattering like tiny firecrackers. That's right, popcorn might have been their late-night snack long before movie theatres existed. Picture a kid giggling as they chase a stray kernel across the floor, their laughter echoing in the pit house. It's a small thing, but it makes you feel connected to them, like they'd totally get your Netflix and chill vibe. This shift to farming sparks more than just new recipes. You notice people crafting pottery, shaping clay into vessels for storing grain or cooking stews. These early pots are simple with rough surfaces and basic designs, but they're a big deal. They're not just for home use. Some are traded with neighbouring groups, swapped for shells, turquoise, or even different seeds. You can imagine the excitement when a trader arrives, their pack heavy with goods, like an ancient version of a delivery truck pulling up. This trade builds connections, weaving your village into a larger web of communities across the southwest. Farming also changes how your people live together. With more food and settled homes, leaders emerge to organise planting and harvests, making sure everyone's fed. You see families gathering in the evenings, sharing meals and stories around a fire. The flames cast shadows on the pit house walls, and you feel the warmth of community, the kind that comes from knowing you're all in this together. Kivas, those underground chambers we'll explore later, start appearing as places for ceremonies tied to the planting cycle, giving thanks for rain and sun. It's like the land itself is part of the conversation guiding their rituals. But here's where the scholars start debating. Historians still argue over what pushed the Anasazi to embrace agriculture so fully. Was it a wetter climate with springs flowing more reliably and rains nourishing crops? Some say yes, pointing to tree ring data showing wetter periods around 500 BCE. Others argue population growth was the driver. More people meant more mouths, and hunting alone couldn't keep up. Then there's the idea that trade with Mesoamerican cultures who'd been farming corn for centuries brought not just seeds but know-how, sparking a cultural shift. It's probably a mix of all three, but the exact recipe is still a mystery, like trying to figure out the secret sauce in your favourite dish. As you walk through the fields, the rustle of corn leaves feels like a whisper of progress. This isn't just about growing food. It's about building a future. The pit houses the pottery, the trade, the stories. They're all seeds of the society that will one day build those cliff dwellings we're heading toward. You can't help but grin imagining a kid munching on that ancient popcorn, unaware they're part of a moment that'll echo through history. The Anasazi are planting more than crops. They're planting the roots of a culture that'll thrive in the canyons and mesas for centuries. You're perched on a narrow ledge in Mesa Verde around 1200 C, the canyon stretching out below like a painting you could fall into. The air is dry tinged with the scent of dust and piñón pine, and the faint chink of stone tools echoes off the sandstone walls. You're watching the Ancestral Puebloans, those same folks who mastered corn and built pueblos on the mesas, transform a cliff alcove into a thriving village. These aren't just houses. They're cliff dwellings carved into the very rock of the four corners. And the engineering is enough to make your head spin. Picture yourself trying to balance on this ledge with a basket of stones, no safety harness, and definitely no Wi-Fi to check a DIY tutorial. Yet these builders are making it look almost easy, their hands steady and their vision clear. Let's zoom in on Cliff Palace, the crown jewel of Mesa Verde. A sprawling complex with over 150 rooms and 23 kivas nestled under a massive rock overhang. You watch a worker chisel sandstone into neat blocks, each one shaped to fit like a puzzle piece. The stone comes straight from the canyon walls, quarried with nothing but antler tools and raw determination. They mix mortar from soil water and ash, spreading it with their hands to bind the blocks. Smaller stones, called chinking stones, are wedged into gaps for extra strength. Think of it as ancient caulking, but way more stylish. Wooden beams hauled from forests miles away form the roofs and floors, their ends still visible in the walls today. You can almost hear the creak of a ladder as someone climbs to the next level carrying a load of logs like it's just another Tuesday. The alcove itself is a gift from nature, a curved overhang that acts like a giant umbrella, shielding the dwellings from rain and scorching sun. You notice how the builders use every inch of space, tucking rooms into corners and stacking them like a stone Jenga tower. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some walls were built by carving directly into the cliff face, hollowing out the rock to create rooms that hug the stone. It's like they were part interior designer, part extreme cave dweller, saying, why build a wall when you can sculpt one? This technique wasn't just cool, it anchored the structures, making them near impossible to topple. Try moving into a house that's literally part of a mountain. Good luck with the renovations. Building Cliff Palace took serious teamwork. You see men quarrying stone, their muscles straining as they chip away at the cliff. Women mix mortar, their hands caked with clay, while kids scurry about hauling smaller stones or fetching water from the spring below. It's a community effort, everyone moving in sync like a well-rehearsed dance. They level the floors with packed earth plaster walls, with coloured clay reds, yellows, whites, and even add decorative touches like painting bands around doorways. The precision is mind-boggling. Doorways align with the sunrise. For solstice rituals and kivas, those underground ceremonial chambers are dug with exacting care. You can't help but wonder how they coordinated it all. Did they have a head architect barking orders? Or was it more of a, we'll figure it out as we go vibe? Here's where the scholars get chatty historians still argue whether these cliff dwellings were meticulously planned or grew organically over time. Some say the layouts with their aligned doorways and kivas suggest a master plan may be drawn in the dirt by a visionary leader. Others argue the dwellings expanded room by room as families grew, or new folks moved in, like adding a guest room when your cousins show up unannounced. Archaeological evidence like the consistent use of chinking stones and beam placements leans toward planning, but the irregular shapes of some rooms hint at improvisation. Either way, the result is a masterpiece that stood for centuries. Let's talk about the main historical fact. Cliff Palace, built between 1190 and 1260 CE, was a multi-purpose complex serving as home storage and ceremonial spaces for about 100 people. Its 150 rooms included living quarters, granaries for storing corn and kivas for rituals, all packed into an alcove that's both cozy and colossal. The scale is hard to grasp until you're standing there craning your neck to take it all in. It's not just a village, it's a statement, a bold declaration of survival in a harsh land. I'll be honest, watching this makes me glad for modern construction. Imagine trying to explain to your boss why you dropped a sandstone block off the cliff again. Or convincing your kid to haul water up a ladder without spilling it. These folks had grit and maybe a sense of humour to pull this off without so much as a wheelbarrow. Speaking of which, if they'd had coffee, I bet Cliff Palace would have been finished in half the time. Can you picture them passing around a clay mug, joking about who's got the best chinking stone technique? As you linger on the ledge, the hum of activity surrounds you, the clatter of tools, the murmur of voices, the occasional laugh. These cliff dwellings are more than stone and mortar. They're a testament to human ingenuity, a community's will to thrive against the odds. You're starting to see how the Anasazi turned a cliff into a home, and you can't wait to step inside their world. You're waking up in Cliff Palace around 1200 CE, nestled high in a sandstone alcove above Mesa Verde's canyon floor. The first thing you notice is the cool, earthy air tinged with the faint smokiness of last night's fire. You roll over on your woven yucca mat, blinking in the dim light, and crawl through a doorway so small it feels like you're squeezing into a secret hideout. These doorways, barely 2 feet high, are a quirky hallmark of cliff life designed to keep homes warm and secure. But let's be honest, they're also a daily test of your flexibility. You emerge onto a ledge, the morning sun just kissing the canyon's red walls, and take a deep breath. Your family, part of a tight-knit community of about 100 people, is already stirring, and the rhythm of life in this cliff dwelling is kicking into gear. As you stretch, you hear the soft grind of corn from a nearby room where your mother works a metate, turning dried kernels into flour. The sound is steady, almost hypnotic, blending with the chatter of neighbours and the occasional clatter of a clay pot. Your home is one of 150 rooms in Cliff Palace, a sprawling village tucked under a massive rock overhang. It's compact, think less open-plan loft and more cosy cave with a view. The walls built with those sandstone blocks we saw last time are smooth and cool to the touch, plastered with clay that's starting to flake in spots. There are no windows, which keeps things quiet, but makes it feel like you're living in a perpetual twilight. You light a small fire for warmth, its glow dancing on the walls, and wonder how anyone found their sandals in this gloom. Morning means work and you're off to the Mesa top fields. You grab a ladder, its wooden rungs worn smooth by countless hands, and climb up from the alcove, praying you don't slip. Those ladders remember the ones hauled up during construction. They're your lifeline connecting the cliff to the world above. On the mesa, you tend rows of corn beans and squash the three sisters that keep your family fed. You weed with a sharpened stick the dry soil crumbling under your fingers and check for pests, hoping the crows haven't been too greedy. Farming up here is tough with the sun beating down and water hauled from a spring below. You can't help but laugh imagining trying to convince a teenager today to carry water up a cliff without complaining. Good luck with that. Back in the dwelling, afternoon brings a shift to crafting. Your uncle sits cross-legged shaping a clay pot, his fingers tracing black on white spirals that seem to shimmer in the light. You join your aunt weaving yucca fibers into sandals, their prickly texture making your hands itch. Next time I'm trading for turkey feather slippers, you joke, earning a chuckle. These moments of work are also moments of connection. Stories are swapped, gossip shared, and plans made for the next hunt. The rooms are small, often just 6 by 8 feet, so you're always bumping elbows with someone. Historians still argue whether this closeness strengthened community bonds or sparked the occasional family feud. With everyone sharing walls and resources, you bet there were days when personal space felt like a distant dream. As evening falls, the alcove glows with the soft light of fires. You head to a kiva, climbing down a ladder into a circular underground chamber. The air is warm, thick with the scent of burning cedar, and the walls are adorned with painted symbols. Here the community gathers, elders share stories, young ones listen wide-eyed, and plans are made for the harvest. Kivas are sacred, but they're also the heart of social life, like an ancient community centre with better acoustics. You sit on a stone bench feeling the weight of tradition and marvel at how these gatherings keep everyone connected, even in such tight quarters. Here's the main historical fact. Cliff Palace housed about 100 people, a mix of families living in interconnected rooms, with each household sharing space for sleeping, cooking, and storage. The design was efficient, with granaries for corn and kivas for ceremonies, all packed into an alcove that maximized protection. Those small doorways, though, they weren't just practical, they were a nod to security, making it hard for outsiders to barge in. You can imagine the relief of crawling into your home, knowing it's a fortress as much as a house. I'll admit, living this close to the edge, literally and figuratively, gives me the jitters. One misstep on a ladder and you're taking the fast way down to the canyon floor. And don't get me started on sharing a tiny room with your whole family. I'd probably hide in a kiva just for some quiet. But there's something inspiring about this life, the way every task from grinding corn to weaving sandals ties you to your community. As night settles over Cliff Palace, you crawl back through that tiny doorway, the stars peeking through the alcove's edge. You pull your turkey feather blanket close the cliff's curve above you like a protective hand and drift off, wondering how they kept the peace in such a crowded, beautiful world. You're back in Cliff Palace, 1200 CE. The morning sun creeping into the alcove, casting golden streaks across the sandstone walls. The air is alive with the hum of a waking village, corn-grinding voices, chatting the occasional clink of a stone tool. You're joining an ancestral Puebloan family for a day in their world, and let me tell you, it's a whirlwind of activity that makes your modern to-do list look like a nap schedule. From farming on the Mesa tops to crafting in cramped rooms, life here is all about survival, but there's a thread of joy woven through it all. You're about to dive into a day that's equal parts sweat and connection with that cliff we've been hanging out on, keeping everyone safe and sound. First up, it's time to farm. You grab a ladder, yet one of those creaky ones from the construction days we saw, and climb up to the mesa. Top your sandals scuffing against the rungs. The fields stretch out before you, rows of corn beans and squash basking in the sunlight. You pick up a hoe, its wooden handle worn smooth, and start weeding the dry soil crunching under your feet. These three sisters' crops, remember them from our corn revolution. They're the backbone of your diet, but growing them in this arid land is no picnic. You check the irrigation channels, little ditches that carry water from springs down in the canyon. Hauling that water up here is a chore. Imagine lugging a clay jar up a cliff without spilling half. You'd probably need a nap and a motivational speech just to try again. Some of the men head out to hunt their bows slung over their shoulders, tracking rabbits or deer with steps so quiet they blend into the wind's whisper. Back in the alcove, morning chores are in full swing. Your aunt is at her metart grinding corn into flour, the stones scrape a steady rhythm that's practically the village soundtrack. You kneel beside her, helping to sift the flour, the fine dust tickling your nose. It's meditative, but your arms are already complaining. Across the way, your uncle sharpens a flint knife, prepping for the next hunt, or maybe just to look busy. The rooms are small, like we talked about last time, so every task feels like a group project. You can't help but chuckle picturing trying to work from home in a 6-by-8-foot room with your whole family around. Talk about zero personal space. Afternoon brings a shift to crafting, and you're all in. You sit with your cousin shaping a clay pot, your fingers smoothing the surface as you paint black on white spirals that catch the light. These pots aren't just for cooking, they're art trade goods, even family heirlooms. Nearby, your sister weaves yucca fibres into a basket, her hands moving so fast it's like she's got a secret superpower. You try your hand at it, but your basket looks more like a lumpy pancake. Maybe I'll stick to pottery, you joke, and she laughs, tossing you a strand of yucca that's prickly enough to make you wince. Meanwhile, the kids are having a blast moulding clay into tiny figurines, animals, people, even weird little shapes that could be ancient action figures. These clay toys found in archaeological digs are a quirky glimpse into their world, showing kids had time to dream and create even in a life full of chores. You eye one particularly detailed deer figurine and whisper I'd trade my basket for that any day. As the sun dips, evening brings everyone together. You gather in a courtyard, the alcove's walls glowing with the last light. Someone passes around roasted corn, its sweet, smoky flavour, a perfect end to the day. Elders share stories, their voices weaving tales of hunts and harvests, while kids chase each other dodging ladders like it's an obstacle course. A few folks practice a dance, their feet stomping in rhythm, the sound bouncing off the cliff. These moments aren't just fun, they're glue holding the community tight. Historians still argue how much time went to work versus play. Farming and crafting were relentless, no doubt, but these gatherings, these bursts of laughter and song, feel like the heart of cliff life. Without them, you're not sure how anyone would have kept going. Here's the main historical fact. The ancestral Puebloans farmed their Mesa-top fields, growing corn beans and squash, which they irrigated with water hauled from canyon springs. This wasn't just a side hustle. It was the core of their survival, feeding villages like Cliff Palace and fueling their growth. Those fields, often miles from the dwellings, demanded constant care from planting to harvesting, and the water logistics were a feat of endurance. I'll be real, living this way sounds exhausting. One trip up the ladder with a water jar and I'd be begging for a day off. But there's something magical about these evenings, the way a simple meal or a shared story can recharge you. Imagine trying to organise a family game night in an alcove with 100 neighbours watching. These folks made it work, and then some. As night falls, you huddle by a small fire, the stars twinkling above the alcove's edge. The day's work fades, replaced by the warmth of togetherness, and you drift off, marvelling at how they turned a cliff into a life so full. You're standing in the heart of Cliff Palace, 1200 CE, the alcove alive with the pulse of a bustling village. The scent of roasting corn wafts from a small fire, mingling with the earthy aroma of sandstone walls still warm from the day's sun. Voices bounce off the cliff, a mix of laughter, instructions, and the occasional kid whining about carrying water. You're about to peel back the layers of ancestral Puebloan society, figuring out how these folks organized themselves in this cliffside world we've been exploring. It's not just about who lives where, it's about the invisible threads of clans, roles, and responsibilities that make life in these cramped quarters feel less like a crowded elevator and more like a family that's got each other's backs. Let's start with the big picture clans. As you weave through the village, dodging ladders and ducking through those tiny doorways we grumbled about, you notice how everyone's connected, like the fibres in one of those yucca baskets we saw being crafted. Clans are groups of families who share a common ancestor, maybe traced through stories or symbols painted on pottery. Each clan has its own vibe. Some might tend the best cornfields up on the Mesa, while others lead ceremonies in the kivas we'll visit soon. You see a group of women from one clan grinding corn, their metates, scraping in unison, their chatter as lively as the fire nearby. Across the courtyard, men from another clan haul sandstone blocks, probably fixing a wall or adding a new room. It's a system that keeps the village humming, with every clan pitching in like pieces of a puzzle. You can't help but think it's like a never-ending family reunion, except nobody's arguing over who gets the last piece of roasted squash yet. Now let's talk roles, because this isn't a free-for-all. Women are the powerhouse of the household, and you're in awe watching your aunt weave a blanket from turkey feathers, her fingers moving like they've got a mind of their own. Those feathers remember the turkeys we mentioned way back. They're not just for eating, they're woven into soft, warm textiles that could rival your coziest throw. Your mother, meanwhile, is shaping a clay pot, its black on white spirals catching the light. These women aren't just crafting, they're managing the family's resources, deciding what corn gets stored, what pots get traded. It's a quiet kind of power, like running a small business from a 6 by 8 foot room. Men, on the other hand, take on hunting and building. You spot your uncle with his bow ready to track rabbits, or your father chipping away at sandstone adding to the village's walls, like we saw during construction. Elders are the glue, sharing wisdom and settling disputes, their voices carrying weight in every decision. Even kids have jobs, your little cousins hauling a jar of water looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. You give them a sympathetic nod, thinking, same kid, same. Leadership here is tricky to pin down, and it's not like anyone's strutting around with a crown. You notice an elder organising the next planting schedule, their calm authority drawing nods from the group. They're respected not because of a title, but because they know the land, the seasons, the stories. Some kivas, those underground chambers we'll dive into next, are exclusive to certain clans, like private clubs, where only specific families gather for rituals. It's a quirky detail. Imagine needing a clan membership to get into your kiva's solstice party. You can almost picture them passing around a clay mug of corn mush, joking about who's got the best dance moves. This setup hints at a social hierarchy, but it's subtle, woven into daily life, rather than shouted from a rooftop. Here's where the scholars start bickering. Historians still argue whether leadership was hereditary or based on merit. Some point to artifacts like rare turquoise jewellery suggesting certain families held status across generations. Others argue leadership was earned maybe the best farmer or the wisest storyteller got to call the shots. There's no clear evidence of kings or chiefs, just hints of respected figures guiding the group. It's like trying to figure out who's in charge at a potluck. Everyone's contributing, but someone's quietly making sure the food doesn't run out. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, but the lack of fancy tombs or thrones keeps it a mystery. Let's hit the main historical fact. Ancestral Puebloan society was organized around clans with kinship ties, shaping everything from farming to ceremonies. These clans, often matrilineal meaning descent, was traced through mothers' ensured cooperation in villages like Cliff Palace, where about 100 people lived interdependently. It was a system that turned a rocky alcove into a community, not just a collection of rooms. I'll be honest, living this close to everyone sounds like a recipe for chaos. One loud snorer in the next room and you're dreaming of moving to a Mesa top. But there's something beautiful about this setup, the way every task, from weaving to hunting, ties you to your clan, your village, your cliff. As evening settles, you join a courtyard, gathering the alcove glowing with firelight. Laughter and song echo off the walls, and you feel the strength of these connections. You can't help but wonder if you'd fit in, or if you'd accidentally start a clan feud by spilling someone's corn stash. For now, you're content to listen the stars above the alcove, winking as the village hums with life. You're standing at the edge of a kiva in Cliff Palace 1200 CE, the alcove around you quiet except for the soft rustle of wind through the canyon. The kiva, a circular chamber carved into the sandstone floor, beckons like a secret waiting to be shared. You grip the ladder's worn rungs, those same ones we've climbed before, and descend the air growing cooler, tinged with the faint earthy scent of cedar smoke. This is the spiritual heart of the Ancestral Puebloans, a place where they wove their beliefs into the very rock of the cliff. You're about to step into a sacred space where every symbol, every flicker of fire feels like a whisper from the past, pulling you deeper into their world. As your feet touch the kiva's packed earth floor, you take a seat on a stone bench, the walls curving around you like an embrace. These chambers, two of them scattered through Cliff Palace, alone are the soul of the village built for ceremonies that tied the people to the land, the sky, and their ancestors. You notice a small hole in the center of the floor no bigger than your fist, called a sipapu. It's a quirky detail, this little dent, but it's heavy with meaning, a symbol of the Ancestral Puebloans' creation myth, where their people emerged from an underworld, climbing through layers of existence to reach this world. It's like a cosmic trapdoor, connecting the kiva to the divine. You can't help but smile imagining trying to explain that to a modern architect. Yeah, just add a spiritual portal in the floor, no big deal. The kiva's design is deliberate, every detail steeped in purpose. A fire pit glows in the center, its embers casting shadows on the walls. A ventilation shaft cuts through the stone, drawing fresh air to keep the space breathable, while a deflector stone guides the breeze. You watch an elder sprinkle corn pollen into the flames, the smoke curling upward in delicate spirals as if carrying prayers to the spirits above. This practice, burning corn pollen, is a quirky ritual believed to bridge the earthly and the sacred, a way to ask for rain, good harvests, or healing. The moment is quiet, almost fragile, but it feels alive, like the kiva itself is listening. Rituals here are tied to the rhythms of nature, sun-rain season cycles that governed life in the cliffs. You imagine the kiva filled with people, their voices rising in chants, feet stomping in dances, maybe even masked figures reenacting stories of creation or heroes. Offerings, corn feathers turquoise, might be placed near the sipapu gifts to the spirits for a bountiful season. The kiva's architecture mirrors the cosmos, its circular shape echoes the horizon, and its roof beams align with solstice, sunrises marking time in a way that feels eternal. You notice painted symbols on the walls, spirals, stars, animals echoing those petroglyphs we saw carved into canyon walls way back in the four corners. It's like the Ancestral Puebloans were writing their beliefs in stone, a sacred art gallery right in their living room. But here's where things get murky. Historians still argue whether kivas were purely religious or doubled as social hubs. Sure, they were sacred ceremonies for planting harvests or rites of passage, happened here, no question. But we've also seen these spaces used for gatherings like those storytelling sessions or planning meetings we caught in the alcove. Families, sometimes specific clans, like we talked about last time, would crowd in sharing food, laughter, maybe even a bit of gossip. Was the kiva a temple, a community centre, or both. Some archaeologists point to the sipapu and ritual artefacts as proof of its holy role, while others note the benches and fire pits, perfect for a village hangout. It's like trying to decide if your local coffee shop is for work or just chilling. Probably a bit of both, depending on the day. Let's anchor this with the main historical fact: kivas were central to ancestral Puebloan religious life, used for ceremonies that honoured natural cycles and ancestral spirits. Built underground with features like the sipapu fire pit and ventilation shaft, they were designed to connect the physical and spiritual worlds, a sacred space for a village of about 100 people. They weren't just rooms. They were anchors grounding the community in their beliefs. I'll admit sitting in a kiva sounds intense, like being in a space where every word carries weight. Imagine trying to sneak in a snack during a ceremony and accidentally dropping your corn cob into the sipapu. Awkward. But there's something powerful about this setup, the way it brought everyone together, eyes on the fire hearts, open to the unseen. As the fire's glow fades, you climb back up the ladder, the alcove's starlit sky greeting you. The kiva's warmth lingers, a reminder that this wasn't just a place, it was a bridge to something bigger, holding the ancestral Puebloans steady in a world of cliffs and stars. You can't shake the feeling of wonder picturing them praying for rain, their voices rising like smoke, trusting the land to answer. You're crouched in a small room in Cliff Palace, 1200 CE, the alcove's shade wrapping you in a cool embrace as the desert sun blazes outside. In front of you, an ancestral Puebloan woman shapes a clay pot, her fingers steady as she smooths the damp surface. The air hums with the soft scrape of her tools, a rhythmic whisper that blends with the distant call of a hawk. Nearby on a canyon wall just beyond the alcove, petroglyphs, catch-your-eye spirals, animals and figures etched into the sandstone like the ones we marvelled at back in the four corners. This isn't just art. It's a language, a way to capture the pulse of life in the cliffs. You're about to dive into the pottery and rock art that turned these dwellings into a gallery of stories, each piece a thread in the ancestral Puebloans' world of beauty and belief. Let's start with the pottery because it's everywhere you look. The woman dips a yucca brush into a bowl of black pigment painting, intricate patterns, spirals, zigzags, checkerboards that seem to dance in the flicker of a nearby fire. These black-on-white pots are the rock stars of ancestral Puebloan art crafted from local clays and fired in pits to create a creamy white base that's tough as nails. You watch her work, mesmerized by the precision, each line as balanced as a song. These pots aren't just pretty, they're workhorses used to store corn from those Mesa top fields, cook stews over kiva fires, or trade with far-off villages. Some are massive, big enough to hold a season's harvest. Others are small, maybe for a child's portion of mush. You can't help but joke that dropping one would be like smashing your grandma's heirloom china, heartbreaking, and you'd probably be scrubbing floors for a week to make up for it. The process is intense. You see her knead the clay, mixing in tiny bits of crushed rock to make it stronger, then coil it into shape, smoothing each layer with a stone or her hands. Firing is a gamble, too hot, and the pot cracks. Too cool, and it's brittle. Yet the results are stunning, with designs that echo the rhythms of the land waves for water triangles for mountains. These pots were so valued that they were traded across the southwest, some ending up hundreds of miles away like the ancient equivalent of a viral Etsy shop. You imagine carrying one back to your own time, showing it off like, check out this 800-year-old masterpiece I scored in Mesa, Verde. Now let's step outside to the rock art. You trace your fingers over petroglyphs carved into the canyon wall, careful not to touch too hard. There's a bighorn sheep, a handprint. And here's the quirky bit. A trail of footprints like someone left a map of their morning jog. These footprints found across ancestral Puebloan sites might mark migration routes, spiritual journeys, or even clan territories, though no one's sure. The carvings are made by pecking the rock with a harder stone, a slow, deliberate act that feels like a conversation with the cliff itself. You also spot pictographs painted with red or white pigments from crushed minerals, their colours still vivid after centuries. Spiral stars and human figures seem to glow under the sun as if the stone is alive with stories. You can almost hear the tap-tap of the artist's tool, their breath steady as they worked. Here's where the scholars get chatty. Historians still argue whether pottery and rock art were mainly practical ceremonial or a way to flex social status. The pots were definitely useful archaeological digs, show them stuffed with corn or charred from cooking. But their intricate designs, especially on larger ones found in kivas, like those we visited last time, suggest they played a role in rituals, maybe as offerings or symbols of clan pride. Finer pots with complex patterns often show up in burials or sacred spaces, hinting they were status symbols, like carrying a designer bag today. Rock art's purpose is even trickier. Were petroglyphs maps, prayers for rain, or just a way to say, I was here? Some argue they marked sacred sites, while others see them as community bulletin boards. The truth likely depends on the context, but it's a puzzle that keeps archaeologists up at night. Let's lock in the main historical fact: black-on-white pottery crafted with geometric designs was a cornerstone of ancestral Puebloan life used for storage, cooking, and trade across the southwest. Found in sites like Cliff Palace, these pots weren't just tools, they were art, carrying the culture's identity in every curve and line. I'll be real, trying to paint a pot like that without smudging it sounds like a nightmare. I'd probably end up with more paint on me than the clay. And carving petroglyphs. Forget it. One wrong tap and your masterpiece looks like a toddler's doodle. But there's something magical about this art, the way it blends function and feeling. As you hold a finished pot, its weight grounding you, you feel the ancestral Puebloans' spirit in its smooth surface. Their art wasn't separate from life. It was life, a way to honor the land, the spirits, and each other. You can't shake the urge to leave your own mark, maybe a spiral or a footprint, something to say you were part of this cliffside story too. You're standing in a bustling courtyard in Cliff Palace, 1200 CE. The alcove alive with the hum of voices and the shuffle of sandals on stone. A trader, their woven basket heavy with goods, kneels to unpack a stash of turquoise beads that glint like tiny pieces of the sky. The air is thick with excitement, laced with the sharp scent of sagebrush, and the dust kicked up by curious onlookers. This isn't just a market day. It's a lifeline, a moment when your cliffside village connects to a world far beyond the canyons we've been wandering. Those black-on-white pots you were admiring last time with their hypnotic spirals. They're not just staying in Cliff Palace, they're hitting the road carrying your culture across deserts and mesas. You're about to follow the trade routes that made the Ancestral Puebloans the ultimate networkers of the ancient Southwest. Let's unpack what's happening. The trader lays out your village's specialties, those stunning black-on-white pots, their geometric designs catching the firelight, alongside polished turquoise beads from mines not far from here. There's dried corn too packed tight from the Mesa-top fields we worked in earlier, a reminder of that agricultural revolution that started it all. In exchange, the trader offers treasures from afar, obsidian chunks sharp enough to slice through leather from volcanic lands to the west. Abalone shells shimmering with ocean iridescence all the way from the Pacific. And here's the showstopper scarlet macaw feathers, their vibrant reds and blues practically glowing. Those feathers came from Mesoamerica, hundreds of miles south, a journey that makes your legs ache just thinking about it. You can't help but joke that hauling all this across the desert must have been like running an ancient FedEx route, except with no air-conditioned vans and a lot more sunburn. These goods trace a web of trade routes that tied Cliff Palace to the broader Southwest. You picture the paths worn by countless feet stretching to Chaco Canyon about 100 miles south, where massive great houses served as trade hubs like the Wall Street of the 13th century. Chaco was a big deal pottery turquoise. Even copper bells from Mexico flowed through there, and some of that made its way to your alcove. The roots didn't stop at Chaco, though. Artifacts show connections to the Hohokam in Arizona, the Mogollon in New Mexico, and even markets as far as Mesoamerica, where macaws and cacao were sourced. You imagine a trader setting out their baskets strapped tight, dodging scorching heat-sudden storms, and maybe the occasional bandit. It wasn't just a job, it was an adventure. One that kept villages like yours stocked with goods and stories. Trade wasn't only about swapping stuff. It was a cultural exchange, like downloading ideas from another world. You spot a pot with patterns you've never seen, curved lines that feel more fluid than your village's sharp angles. Maybe it's a style picked up from southern neighbours sparking new designs for your potters. Trade brought more than goods. It brought inspiration, techniques, even spiritual practices. Those macaw feathers, for instance, weren't just pretty. They were sacred, used in kiva ceremonies like the ones we peeked into last time, tying your rituals to distant lands. But here's a quirky twist. Some of those beautiful pots you've been oohing over, they weren't always meant to last. Archaeologists have found smashed pottery and kivas deliberately broken as part of rituals, as if their value was in the act of sacrifice, not just their use. You can almost hear the crunch of clay underfoot, picturing a ceremony where breaking a pot was as sacred as burning corn pollen. Try explaining that to your budget-conscious aunt who'd faint at the thought of smashing her dishes. Here's where the scholars start debating. Historians still argue just how extensive these trade networks were. The presence of macaw feathers and copper bells in sites like Chaco and Mesa Verde proves long-distance trade. No question those birds didn't just fly up from Mexico for a vacation. But was this a regular thing with traders making routine trips, or were these exotic goods rare treasured like a limited edition collectible? Some argue the networks were vast with steady flows of goods and ideas pointing to the sheer volume of pottery and turquoise found across the southwest. Others say the scale was smaller, with long-distance items like macaw feathers being high-status luxuries, not everyday imports. It's like guessing how many packages Amazon delivers in a day big, but exactly how big. The artifacts keep us guessing. Let's lock in the main historical fact: Ancestral Puebloans maintained trade networks that connected Cliff Palace to Chaco Canyon, the broader Southwest and even Mesoamerica, exchanging pottery turquoise and corn for goods like obsidian shells and macaw feathers. These networks, active around 1200 CE, were vital for resources and cultural exchange, shaping life in the cliffs. I'll be honest, the idea of trekking across deserts with a basket of pots makes my back hurt just thinking about it. And smashing a perfectly good pot for a ritual, that's commitment. I can't wrap my head around my clumsy self, breaks things by accident, not on purpose. But there's something thrilling about this connected world, the way a single feather or pot could carry a story from a jungle to a cliff. As the trader packs up their basket lighter, but their eyes bright with tales, you feel the pulse of a village that's part of something huge. You can't help but wonder what you'd trade to join this network: a pot, a story, or maybe just a really good joke to make the journey less lonely. You're standing in the heart of Cliff Palace, 1300 CE, but something's wrong. The alcove, once buzzing with the sounds of grinding corn laughter and footsteps, is now eerily still. The air feels heavy, carrying only the soft whisper of wind through the canyon and the faint creak of a ladder left leaning against a wall. The ancestral Puebloans, whose lives we've followed through fields, kivas and trade routes, are gone. Their cliffside homes, those sandstone rooms we watch them build, are empty, their fires cold. Pottery sits untouched on dusty floors. Corn kernels are scattered like forgotten confetti, and the kivas we sat in alive with ceremony are dark and silent. Why did they leave? You're about to step into the mystery of their abandonment, chasing clues through a village that feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for a story that never finished. As you wander through the deserted rooms, your sandals crunch on bits of broken pottery, each shard a piece of the black on white art we admired. You notice a half-finished basket, its yucca fibres frayed as if someone dropped it mid-weave. The silence is unsettling, like walking into a party after everyone's left. Archaeologists have pieced together a grim clue tree ring data, shows a brutal drought hit the four corners around 1275 CE, stretching on for decades. You can almost feel the desperation those Mesa-top fields of corn, beans and squash we worked so hard to tend. They withered under a relentless sun. The springs we hauled water from, like the ones we saw trickling in the canyons, slowed to a drip or dried up entirely. You imagine families rationing their last stores of corn elders, leading prayers in kivas for rain that never came, their voices echoing off the sipapu we marveled at. It's hard to picture a worse blow in a land where water was already worth more than gold. But drought alone doesn't tell the whole story. You pause by a room with charred wooden beams, the blackened ends stark against the sandstone. This is a quirky detail. Some structures in Mesa Verde show signs of burning, and not from accidents. Were these fires set by enemies hinting at conflict as resources dwindled? Or did the ancestral Puebloans themselves burn their homes, a ritual to cleanse or close this chapter before leaving? You can almost smell the acrid smoke, picturing a family standing at the alcove's edge, watching flames consume the life they built. It's a haunting image, like hitting delete on a project you poured your heart into. Either way, the burns are a clue that something more than dry weather pushed them out. Other theories tug at you. Resource depletion could have played a role. Centuries of farming and hunting might have worn out the soil and thinned the herds of deer and rabbits we chased. Those trade networks we followed, bringing macaw feathers, and obsidian relied on surplus corn, but with failing crops, there was little to share. Social tensions like the ones we wondered about in the crowded alcoves could have boiled over. You imagine clans like the ones we saw organizing life, arguing over the last scraps of food or water, their tight-knit bonds fraying under stress. Or maybe it was a religious shift. Those traders we met brought new ideas, new rituals. Did a spiritual call, perhaps a vision in a kiva, urge them to seek new lands? You picture families packing their baskets, leaving behind the pots and petroglyphs. We loved heading south to rivers like the Rio Grande or Little Colorado, where their descendants, the modern Pueblo peoples, still thrive. Here's where the scholars get heated. Historians still argue whether environmental stress like the drought or internal strife like conflict or social breakdown was the main driver. Tree ring data and pollen records scream drought, showing a climate so harsh it could have broken even the toughest farmers. But skeletal remains, some with signs of violence, and those burned structures hint at fighting, maybe between villages or within them. Then there's the idea of a cultural shift. New religious movements might have pulled people away, like a spiritual migration. It's probably a mix, like a perfect storm where nature and human choices collided, but the exact balance is a puzzle with pieces still missing. You can't help but think it's like trying to solve a mystery novel where the last chapter's been torn out. Let's pin down the main historical fact. The ancestral Puebloans abandoned their cliff dwellings, including Cliff Palace, by around 1300 CE, leaving behind homes, tools, and artifacts that suggest a rapid departure. Archaeological evidence, from pottery to burned beams, paints a picture of a people who didn't vanish, but migrated their culture, living on in modern Pueblo communities. I'll be honest, standing in this empty alcove gives me chills. It's one thing to lose your Wi-Fi signal, but to walk away from a home you carved into a cliff, that's next level. I'd probably leave a note saying, "Back soon, just grabbing some rain." But there's something profound about their choice. They didn't disappear. They adapted, carrying their stories to new lands. As you sit in a silent kiva, the sipapu dark and empty, you feel the weight of their decision. The cliffs hold their secrets like a story paused mid-sentence, and you can't shake the question: if your world changed overnight, what would you leave behind? For now, the stars above the alcove are your only answer, twinkling as if they know more than they're letting on. You're standing just outside Cliff Palace, 1300 CE, the alcove stretching before you like a stage abandoned mid-act. The hum of life-grinding, corn-weaving baskets chanting in kivas has faded, replaced by the soft sigh of wind through the canyon. The ancestral Puebloans, whose world we've lived in through fields, trade routes and sacred spaces, have left these cliffs, their homes now silent. But this isn't the end of their story. They didn't vanish into the desert air, they migrated, carrying their culture, their spirit to new lands. Their descendants, modern Pueblo peoples like the Hopi Zuni and others, keep their legacy alive in ways that make your heart hum. You're about to trace that thread following the echoes of Cliff Palace into the present, where stone walls and ancient songs still speak. Close your eyes for a moment and picture yourself in a Hopi village today, the sun warm on your face, the scent of sagebrush drifting by just like it did in those Four Corners canyons we wandered. You sit with an elder, their voice low and steady, telling stories of ancestors who lived in houses of stone, high in cliffs or on mesas. These tales aren't myths, they match the ruins we've explored, places like Cliff Palace, with its 150 rooms and 23 kivas. The Hopi call their ancestors Hisatsinom, meaning people of long ago, and their oral traditions weave a direct line to Mesa Verde. You feel a shiver like you're hearing the same stories told around a kiva fire centuries ago, the ones we caught glimpses of in those sacred chambers. It's not just words, Hopi and Zuni dances with their rhythmic steps and feathered regalia honor rain corn and spirits echoing the ceremonies we imagined under the alcoves curve. Now look at the architecture. You visit a Pueblo village, maybe Taos or a Coma, and see multi-story homes built of adobe and stone, their flat roofs supported by wooden beams just like the ones we saw hauled into Cliff Palace. These modern Pueblos aren't exact replicas, but the DNA is there, the same knack for building with the land, for stacking rooms to hold tight-knit clans, like the ones we met organizing village life. You can almost hear the echo of sandstone blocks being set, the chink of tools from those construction days. The three sisters' corn beans and squash are still grown here, planted with the same care we used on those mesa-top fields, their roots deep in the agricultural revolution that changed everything. You can't help but smile thinking of the popcorn we munched on in our farming days, wondering if it's still a snack at Pueblo gatherings. Here's a quirky detail that sticks with you some. Hopi stories describe cliff dwellings as temporary refugees, like safe houses used during times of trouble, maybe drought, conflict, or the tensions we pondered in the abandonment. It's a fascinating twist, suggesting the ancestral Puebloans were always ready to move their cliff homes more like strategic pit stops than forever homes. You picture families climbing down those ladders we gripped, baskets packed with pots and corn ready to start again somewhere new. It's like they had a cultural GPS, always knowing when to stay and when to go, a resilience that makes their migration feel less like a loss and more like a bold choice. The legacy isn't just in stories or buildings, it's in art too. You hold a modern Zuni pot, its spirals and geometric patterns so close to the black on white designs we admired in Cliff Palace. It's like the clay itself remembers. Pueblo weavers still use yucca and cotton crafting textiles that nod to the turkey feather blankets we saw women making. These connections aren't accidents. Oral histories passed down like precious heirlooms have kept techniques and symbols alive. But here's where the scholars start debating historians still argue how much of the ancestral Puebloan culture survived the migration. The drought we learned about, those decades of dry springs and failing crops, disrupted communities, forcing quick moves to places like the Rio Grande. New lands brought new neighbours, new ideas, maybe even new beliefs from those trade routes we followed. Some say this diluted traditions, pointing to shifts in pottery styles or rituals. Others argue the core stayed strong. Oral stories, clan structures and farming wisdom prove a culture that bent but didn't break like a pinyon tree, weathering a storm. Let's pin down the main historical fact. The ancestral Puebloans' legacy lives on in modern Pueblo peoples like the Hopi and Zuni, whose oral traditions, architecture, and ceremonies trace directly to cliff-dwelling ancestors. Archaeological evidence and living practices confirm this continuity, tying Mesa Verde to today's communities across New Mexico and Arizona. I'll be honest, standing here in this quiet alcove, it's easy to feel like the story ended. But then you think of those Hopi elders, their voices carrying the same prayers we heard in kivas, and it hits you. These cliffs are just one chapter. If I tried to tell my life story in one place, I'd probably leave out the best parts too. As you sit under the stars, the canyon's silence feels less lonely, more like a pause. The ancestral Puebloans' legacy isn't locked in these ruins. It's out there in fields of corn, in the rhythm of a dance, in stories told by firelight. You can't shake the question what parts of your own story will echo centuries from now. For now, the stars above Cliff Palace twinkle, like they're in on the secret, urging you to listen a little closer to the voices that still sing. You're stepping into Mesa Verde National Park, the year now, 2025, the desert air warm and tinged with the sharp, clean scent of pinyon pine. The canyons sprawl before you, their red and gold cliffs striped with shadows cradling the ancient homes of the ancestral Puebloans, like a secret kept by the earth. This isn't just a hike. It's a guided tour through a living museum where over 600 cliff dwellings, including the Cliff Palace we've called Homestand, as silent storytellers. Your boots crunch on the gravel trail, the sun high overhead, and you feel a hum of excitement, like you're about to meet the people whose lives we've lived through, fields, kivas, and trade routes. You're ready to explore the heart of their world, each step a bridge between the 13th century and today. Your ranger guide, clad in a wide-brimmed hat, leads you along a winding path, their voice steady as they point out Cliff Palace in the distance. Its massive alcove glows in the sunlight. The 150 rooms and 23 kivas we've wandered through, looking both majestic and intimate against the cliff's curve. You pause to take it in the sandstone blocks, those same ones we watched being set in 1200 CE, fitting so perfectly they seem to grow from the rock. The guide explains how these dwellings, built between 1190 and 1260 CE, used the alcove's natural overhang as a shield against rain and sun, just like we saw during their construction. You're handed a ticket for a ranger-led tour, and soon you're climbing modern ladders, thankfully sturdier than those creaky wooden ones we gripped back then, to enter the village. Ducking through a small doorway, the cool stone brushes your shoulders, and you can't help but chuckle, thinking how much easier this is without a basket of corn balanced on your head. Inside, the guide points out details that feel like old friends. A kiva with its sipapu, where we sat during ceremonies. A granary, where we stored the corn from our Mesa top fields. A courtyard, where we laughed and danced under the stars. You run your fingers along a wall, noticing faint red handprints pressed into the plaster, a quirky signature left by the builders. Were these a way to say, "We were here a blessing for the home," or just someone having fun with leftover paint? You grin, imagining leaving your own handprint, though you'd probably get a stern look from the ranger and a quick lesson on park rules. These handprints, found in several dwellings, are a reminder that the ancestral Puebloans were people like us, leaving marks of their presence in a world they shaped with their hands. The tour doesn't stop at Cliff Palace. Your guide leads you to Spruce Tree House, a smaller dwelling with 130 rooms, its alcove tucked under a lush canopy of junipers. You marvel at its cozy feel, like a cliffside apartment complex. Then there's Balcony House, a daring climb with 40 rooms, perched so precariously you wonder how anyone slept without nightmares of rolling off the edge. Each site shows the variety of Mesa Verde's villages, from sprawling complexes to hidden gems, all built with the same ingenuity we admired sandstone mortar and beams fitted to the cliffs like a glove. The guide shares how Mesa Verde, established as a national park in 1906, was created to protect these sites from looters and erosion, a mission that's kept the Ancestral Puebloans' legacy alive for over a century. You can almost hear the echo of those early park founders arguing over how to balance preservation with letting people like you walk these paths. But here's where the scholars start whispering historians still argue whether all of Mesa Verde's dwellings have been found. The park spans 52,000 acres with rugged canyons and dense brush hiding countless alcoves. Over 600 cliff dwellings are documented, but some archaeologists believe more lie undiscovered, tucked in remote corners where even drones struggle to peek. Others say the major sites like Cliff Palace are the bulk of it, and smaller finds won't change the story. It's like searching for the last piece of a jigsaw puzzle. Either it's out there, or the picture's already complete. You can't help but hope for a hidden alcove, waiting to spill its secrets. Let's lock in the main historical fact. Mesa Verde National Park, established in 1906, preserves over 600 cliff dwellings, including Cliff Palace, built between 1190 and 1260 CE, offering a direct glimpse into ancestral Puebloan life. These sites, protected as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, are a testament to their architectural and cultural achievements, visited by thousands each year. I'll be real, walking these trails makes my legs ache, but it's nothing compared to hauling sandstone up a cliff like our ancestors did. If I tried leaving a handprint, I'd probably smudge it and end up with paint in my hair. But there's something electric about being here, touching the same stones they touched, seeing the same canyons they called home. As you stand on a cliff's edge, Mesa Verde's vastness stretching out, you feel humbled. These aren't just ruins, they're a living link to the people whose legacy, as we learned last time, thrives in Hopi and Zuni voices. You wonder if you'd have the guts to build a life in these cliffs, your heart swelling with their enduring spirit, carried forward like a song that never fades. You're perched on a rocky trail in Mesa Verde National Park 2025, the morning sun spilling golden light across the canyon, bathing Cliff Palace in a glow that makes it look alive. The alcove cradles this ancestral Puebloan masterpiece, its 150 rooms and 23 kivas nestled against the cliff's curve, blending so seamlessly with the sandstone, it's like the earth itself grew a village. This isn't just a pile of stones, it's the beating heart of the world we've lived in, where we planted corn, wove baskets, and prayed in kivas. 800 years ago, you take a deep breath, the air crisp with the scent of juniper and dust, and feel a pull like the cliff is calling you home. You're about to step closer to Cliff Palace, the largest cliff dwelling in North America, each block a story of ingenuity and resilience. Your ranger guide voice, steady and warm, leads you down a winding path, the gravel crunching under your boots. As you approach the alcove's edge, Cliff Palace unfolds before you its multi-story buildings, stacked like ancient apartments, some walls rising 3 levels high. You count the rooms, over 150, from tiny storage nooks to larger living spaces tucked under the massive overhang we marveled at during construction. The 23 kivas, their circular roofs peeking out, dot the layout like sacred anchors, just like the ones we sat in during ceremonies. You trace the masonry with your eyes, the sandstone blocks fitted with that soil ash mortar we watched being mixed, some carved directly into the cliff face for extra stability. Chinking stones, those little wedges we admired, fill gaps, making the walls look like a puzzle solved by masters. You can't help but joke that building this without a single power tool deserves a gold star or at least a very long nap. The guide points out doorways, some aligned with solstice sunrises, catching the first light of summer or winter, a nod to the rituals we felt in the kiva's glow. You climb a modern ladder, way less wobbly than those wooden ones we gripped in 1200 C, and duck through a low doorway, the cool stone brushing your shoulders. Inside, the air smells of earth and time, like stepping into a memory. The guide shows you a granary, its walls still tight where we stored corn from those Mesa top fields. In one corner, you spot a brittle corn cob, left exactly where archaeologists found it, a quirky time capsule of the meals we ground on metates. You imagine dropping it and getting that same stern ranger look we worried about with the handprints last time. These corn cobs scattered in digs are like snapshots, proof that life here was as real as your morning coffee. Each room tells a story. Some were for sleeping with woven yucca mats like the ones we rested on, others for crafting where we shaped those black-on-white pots or wove baskets. Kivas with their sipapus and painted walls hum with the memory of chants and corn pollen smoke. Courtyards where we laughed and danced under the stars tie the village together, their open spaces perfect for the gatherings we joined. The guide explains that Cliff Palace housed about 100 people, a tight-knit community living in a space smaller than a modern city block. It's mind-boggling, like fitting your whole neighborhood into a single apartment complex minus the Wi-Fi and with way more ladders. But here's where the scholars start debating. Historians still argue whether Cliff Palace was one cohesive community or a cluster of separate family groups, like roommates, sharing a big house. The layout feels planned central kivas. Shared courtyards and granaries suggest everyone worked together like the clans we saw organising life. But some room clusters with their own small kivas hint at independent families maybe keeping to themselves, like drawing lines in a shared kitchen. Artifacts like shared pottery styles lean toward unity, but distinct wall designs in some areas suggest individuality. It's like trying to figure out if your office is one big team or a bunch of cliques, probably a bit of both depending on the day. Let's lock in the main historical fact. Cliff Palace, built between 1190 and 1260 CE, is the largest ancestral Puebloan cliff dwelling with 150 rooms and 23 kivas, housing about 100 people in Mesa, Verde. Its intricate masonry, solstice alignments and multi-story design make it a pinnacle of their architectural and cultural achievement, preserved for us to wander today. I'll admit standing here makes my head spin, not just from the height, but from the sheer scale of what they pulled off. If I tried stacking sandstone blocks like that, I'd probably end up with a very sad pile and a bruised ego. And living with 100 people in this cozy alcove, I'd be begging for a quiet corner to hide in. But there's something breathtaking about Cliff Palace, the way it feels both grand and intimate, a fortress and a family home. As you climb back to the trail, the village looms below its stones, catching the fading light. This was more than a place to live, it was a sanctuary, a legacy of the people whose story we've followed from cornfields to kivas to the descendants we met last time. You can't shake the question, how did it feel to call this cliff home, to build a life that still speaks to us? For now the canyon holds its secrets, but your heart's full, carrying their spirit like a spark that won't fade. You're hiking a rugged trail in Mesa Verde National Park 2025, the morning air crisp and laced with the sharp, earthy scent of sagebrush. The canyons stretch out like a painter's canvas, their red and gold cliffs catching the light, revealing alcoves that cradle the homes of the ancestral Puebloans. Last time Cliff Palace stole the show with its sprawling grandeur, but now you're chasing its quieter siblings, Balcony House, Spruce Tree House, and other hidden gems that dot Mesa Verde's 52,000 acres. These smaller cliff dwellings, built between 1190 and 1260 CE, are like chapters in the story we've lived, each offering a fresh glimpse into the lives of the people who farmed, prayed and laughed in these cliffs. You're ready to explore, your boots crunching on gravel, heart humming with the promise of secrets tucked in the stone. Your ranger guide, their hat tilted against the sun, leads you first to Balcony House, and let me tell you, getting there is no stroll in the park. You climb down a 32-foot ladder, your hands gripping tight, way steadier than those wobbly ones we used in 1200 CE, but still enough to make your palms sweat. Then comes the real test, a tunnel so narrow you suck in your breath and shuffle sideways, praying your backpack doesn't snag. With just 40 rooms, Balcony House is compact, but it's got attitude. The guide explains how its tight passages and high walls were built for defense, slowing down anyone who didn't belong, maybe hinting at the conflicts we wondered about during the abandonment. You step onto a wooden balcony, the feature that gives the place its name and picture. Families gathered here may be swapping stories or joking about the dizzying drop below like we did when we first climbed into Cliff Palace. You spot a T-shaped doorway, its top wider than its base, a quirky design that stands out from the low square doorways we squeezed through before. Was it for rituals, a status symbol, or just someone's bold interior decorating choice? You chuckle imagining pitching that to a modern contractor. Yeah, make it T-shaped. It's super trendy. Next stop is Spruce Tree House, and the vibe shifts. Nestled under a canopy of junipers, its 130 rooms feel like a cozy cliffside village, more welcoming than balcony houses' fortress energy. You wander through wide courtyards perfect for the dances and storytelling we joined in those evening gatherings, the stones still warm from the sun. A kiva catches your eye. It's sipapu, a small hole like the one we sat by during ceremonies, still intact, tying this place to the spiritual heart we felt. The guide notes Spruce Tree House's accessibility with gentler paths that let families visit across generations, unlike balcony houses' daredevil climb. You see rooms for living, storing corn and weaving those yucca baskets. We tried our hand at their walls plastered with clay that's starting to flake like an old painting peeling back time. It's less grand than Cliff Palace's 150 rooms, but it feels lived in like a neighborhood where everyone knows your name. These dwellings, though smaller, show the Ancestral Puebloans' knack for tailoring their homes to the cliffs. Balcony House, with its defensive setup, might have been a stronghold during tense times, while Spruce Tree House's open layout screams community, maybe a hub for the clans we saw organizing life. Other sites like Longhouse or Step House add to the mix, each with unique quirks, some with painted walls, others with tiny granaries. The guide shares how these villages built in the same era as Cliff Palace used the same sandstone mortar and beams we watched being set, but their layouts vary like different architects showing off their style. You can't help but marvel at the diversity, like flipping through a scrapbook where every page has a new twist. But here's where the scholars start tossing ideas around. Historians still argue whether these smaller sites were satellites of big players like Cliff Palace or stood on their own. Some say places like Balcony House relied on Cliff Palace for resources like corn or trade goods we followed along those routes, their proximity suggesting a shared network. Others point to distinct features. T-shaped doorways, unique kiva designs, as signs of independent communities, maybe clans with their own leaders, like the ones we saw guiding village tasks. The mix of shared pottery styles and separate room clusters keeps the debate alive, like trying to figure out if your cousins are part of your household or just really close neighbours. Let's lock in the main historical fact. Mesa, Verde's lesser-known cliff dwellings like Balcony House with 40 rooms and Spruce Tree House with 130 built between 1190 and 1260 CE showcase the Ancestral Puebloans' varied architectural approaches from defensive to communal designs. These sites preserved in the park highlight their adaptability to the cliff environment. I'll be real, crawling through that balcony house tunnel made me question my life choices, and I'm still not sold on T-shaped doorways as a design trend. If I tried building one, I'd probably end up with a very confused wall and a lot of explaining to do. But standing in these alcoves, you feel the ancestral Puebloans' spirit, their ability to turn cliffs into homes that fit every need. As you pause in Spruce Tree House's courtyard, the canyon's colours stretching out, you're humbled. These aren't just ruins. They're proof of a people who thrived, whose legacy we've traced to modern pueblos. You can't shake the thought how many more alcoves hide stories like these waiting for a hiker to stumble across their tail. You're standing in a shaded alcove in Mesa Verde National Park 2025, the sun filtering through junipers as archaeologists work nearby their trowels, scraping gently against the earth. The air smells of dry soil and stone, and the faint clink of tools bounces off the sandstone walls of Cliff Palace, the same walls we watched being built 800 years ago. Each careful scoop uncovers a fragment of the ancestral Puebloan world. We've lived shards of pottery-worn tools, even fragile bones that bring the past into sharp focus. You're not just looking at ruins, you're holding pieces of the lives we shared, from grinding corn to praying in kivas. You're about to dive into the archaeological discoveries that make these cliffs sing, piecing together the puzzle of a people whose story is etched in clay, stone, and time. Your guide, an archaeologist with dust-streaked hands, kneels to show you a black-on-white pot, its spiral designs as crisp as the ones we watched being painted in Cliff Palace's rooms. These pots, found across the 150 rooms and 23 kivas we explored, tell of daily life cooking stews, storing corn from those Mesa-top fields, or traded along the routes we followed to Chaco and beyond. You pick up a metate, its surface worn smooth from grinding corn, just like the ones we used the weight heavy in your hands. Nearby, a flint knife sharp enough to skin a rabbit from our hunting days gleams in the light. Yucca sandals, their fibres frayed, and scraps of turkey feather blankets like the ones we wove whisper of the tasks that filled their days. You spot a tiny clay figurine, maybe a deer, or a person like the ones kids played with in those busy afternoons we joined. It's a quirky touch, proof that even in a life of labour there was room for imagination. You grin, thinking if you dropped it you'd be in as much trouble as if you'd smashed one of those pots we handled so carefully. The real magic, though, comes from science. The guide explains tree ring dating, or dendrochronology, which reads the growth rings in wooden beams to pinpoint when they were cut. For Cliff Palace, that's a 90 to 1260 CE, confirming the construction timeline we saw. Those same rings tell a darker story. A severe drought stretching from 1275 to 1299 CE dried up the springs and fields we relied on, tying directly to the abandonment we mourned. You can't help but joke that trees are better historians than your old high school notebooks, which probably just have doodles and questionable math. This method doesn't just date buildings, it maps the climate, showing why the ancestral Puebloans packed their baskets and left, heading to rivers like the Rio Grande we traced in their legacy. In a quieter corner, the guide points to a burial site, bones carefully excavated and studied. These aren't just remains, they're stories. Some burials, often tucked under ledges or in alcoves, include killed pots, vessels, deliberately smashed, a quirky ritual to release their spirit for the afterlife, like the broken pottery we saw in kiva ceremonies. You picture a family placing a pot beside their loved one, cracking it with a stone, believing it would serve them beyond this world. These burials, tied to the sipapu and ancestral reverence we felt in kivas, show a deep spiritual thread, a belief that death was just another journey. The skeletons themselves speak volumes teeth, worn flat from corn-heavy diets, like the meals we ground, healed fractures maybe from a fall on those ladders we climbed, and signs of hard labour etched into their bones like a diary of cliff life. But some bones tell a tougher tale. The guide notes trauma-cut marks, skull fractures on a few remains hinting at conflict like the burned rooms we puzzled over during abandonment. Were these signs of raid's internal strife, or something else? Historians still argue what these remains reveal about the ancestral Puebloans' lives. Some skeletons show robust health with strong bones suggesting a diet of corn beans and game like the feasts we shared. Others hint at malnutrition, especially in later years when drought starved the fields. The trauma marks spark debate: was violence widespread tied to resource scarcity, or were these isolated incidents? The mix of healthy and injured bones keeps the question open, like a detective novel where the clues don't quite line up. You can almost hear the scholars bickering, each with their own theory, none with a smoking gun. Let's lock in the main historical fact: archaeological discoveries at Mesa Verde, including pottery tools and skeletal remains, reveal ancestral Puebloan life from 1190 to 1300 CE, with tree ring dating confirming construction and drought timelines. These finds, from Cliff Palace to smaller sites like Balcony House, paint a vivid picture of their daily routines, beliefs, and challenges. I'll be honest, standing here surrounded by these artifacts makes my skin tingle. It's like holding someone's diary, except it's a pot or a bone. If I tried excavating, I'd probably sneeze and scatter a 1,000-year-old corn cob. But there's something profound about these discoveries, the way they bring the ancestral Puebloans back to life. As you linger in the alcove, the clink of trowels fading, you feel their presence, their meals, their prayers, their struggles. You can't shake the question, what would your own bones say centuries from now? For now, the cliffs hold their stories, each artifact a whisper of a world that still speaks, urging you to listen a little closer. You're standing on a quiet trail in Mesa Verde National Park 2025, the late afternoon sun painting the canyon's red cliffs in hues of fire and gold. The air is warm, laced with the dusty scent of pine and earth. And below you, Cliff Palace's sandstone walls stand steady, their 150 rooms and 23 kivas glowing like a beacon of the ancestral Puebloan world we've called home. This isn't just a pretty view, it's a victory. A testament to over a century of preservation efforts that have kept these cliffs from crumbling into history's dustbin. Since Mesa Verde became a national park in 1906, its 600-plus cliff dwellings, from the Grand Cliff Palace to the cosy Spruce Tree House, have been shielded from looters' erosion and the wear of time. You're about to explore how these ancient homes where we ground corn, wove baskets and prayed in kivas are safeguarded for future generations, each stone a quiet battle against decay. Your ranger guide, their voice soft but firm, points to Cliff Palace's alcove, explaining how park staff work like detectives to keep it standing. They stabilize walls with modern mortar, carefully blended to mimic the soil-ash-water mix we watched being slathered on during construction. You can almost hear the echo of those ancient hands mixing clay under the same sun. To fight erosion, they've carved subtle channels to divert rainwater, stopping it from seeping into the sandstone and crumbling the blocks we saw so painstakingly set. Visitor access is another hurdle those trails we hiked to Balcony House and Spruce Tree House. They're strictly guided tours now, like the ones we took to keep curious feet from trampling fragile floors. You notice scaffolding in a kiva where experts reinforce wooden beams, a nod to the pinyon and juniper logs we watched being hauled up cliffs. It's meticulous work like performing surgery on an 800-year-old patient, and you're grateful for every careful stitch. The guide drops a quirky bombshell. Back in the late 1800s, before the park existed, looters weren't exactly subtle. They'd blast alcoves with dynamite to grab black-on-white pots like the ones we admired ripping through sites like Balcony House for quick treasures. You wince, joking, that's like using a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. Effective, sure, but you're left with a mess and a guilty conscience. Those explosions scarred walls and scattered artifacts, some lost forever. A stark reminder of why Mesa Verde's protection matters. The park's creation in 1906, spurred by activists horrified at such destruction, was a game-changer, and its 1978 UNESCO World Heritage status added global muscle, ensuring sites like Cliff Palace and its corn cobs, those time capsules we marvelled at, stay safe for us to wander. Preservation isn't just about fixing walls, it's about balance. The guide explains how they monitor temperature shifts, which can crack stone, and study soil to prevent slides. They've even replanted native plants like the sagebrush we smelled to stabilize cliffs. These efforts have saved dwellings like Spruce Tree House, with its 130 rooms, from collapsing under their own weight, letting us walk where ancestors danced. But it's not all smooth sailing. Climate change is a new foe. Heavier rains less predictable than the drought. We tied to abandonment, threaten to erode alcoves faster than rangers can patch them. And then there's tourism. 300,000 visitors a year, all eager to climb into Cliff Palace or squeeze through Balcony House's tunnels, put pressure on trails and stones. You can't help but feel a twinge of guilt knowing your own footsteps add to the strain, like being a guest who accidentally overstays their welcome. Here's where the scholars get restless. Historians still argue whether these preservation methods are sustainable. Some praise the park's work stabilizing walls, limiting access as a model, pointing to Cliff Palace's enduring beauty as proof. Others worry it's a losing battle. Modern mortar, even if matched to ancient recipes, can subtly alter a site's authenticity, like editing a masterpiece with a slightly different brush. Climate change, with its wetter storms and hotter summers, could outpace repairs, and the growing tourist tide risks turning sacred spaces into theme parks. It's a tug-of-war between sharing the ancestral Puebloans' legacy, like the stories we trace to modern pueblos, and keeping it untouched. A debate as tricky as balancing a water jar on those ladders we climbed. Let's lock in the main historical fact preservation efforts at Mesa Verde, starting with its establishment as a national park in 1906, protect over 600 cliff dwellings from looting, erosion, and tourism, using techniques like wall stabilization and guided tours. These efforts, recognized by UNESCO in 1978, ensure sites like Cliff Palace remain intact for future generations. I'll be honest, standing here, it's humbling to think how much work goes into keeping these cliffs standing. If I tried stabilizing a wall, I'd probably glue my hand to a rock and call it a day. And knowing dynamite was once the go-to for grabbing a pot, that's wild, like raiding a museum with a wrecking ball. As the sun dips low, casting long shadows over Cliff Palace, you feel the weight of preservation's task. These stones hold the ancestral Puebloans' spirit, the corn we planted, the kivas we prayed in the lives we lived. You can't shake the question, are we doing enough to keep their story safe? For now, the canyon's quiet beauty feels like a promise fragile as a corn cob left in a corner but strong enough to carry their legacy forward. You're sitting at home, 2025, a laptop open, as you plan a trip to Mesa Verde National Park, the desert sun already warming your imagination. The canyons are calling their red and gold cliffs, cradling over 600 ancestral Puebloan cliff dwellings, from the sprawling Cliff Palace we called home to the daring tunnels of Balcony House. This isn't just a vacation, it's a chance to step into the world we've lived, where we planted corn on mesa tops, wove yucca baskets, and felt the hum of kiva ceremonies. The scent of sagebrush and the crunch of gravel trails are practically pulling you out the door. You're about to get practical tips for visiting Mesa Verde, ensuring your adventure honors the past while soaking in the timeless beauty of the cliffs we've come to love. First things first, you need to book your tours. You pull up the Mesa Verde website, your cursor hovering over the plan, your Visit tab. Guided tours are a must for major sites like Cliff Palace Balcony House and Longhouse, just as we learned when we explored preservation efforts. These tours, limited to small groups of 10 to 50, protect the sandstone walls and kivas we've wandered, letting you climb ladders and duck through those low doorways we squeezed through in 1200 CE. You grab tickets for Cliff Palace's 1-hour tour, picturing its 150 rooms glowing in the sun and Balcony House's adventurous climb with that 32-foot ladder we gripped with sweaty palms. Longhouse on Wetherill Mesa tempts you with its 150 rooms and quieter vibe. The site warns that reservations fill fast, especially from May to October, when 300,000 visitors flood the park. You pick May when the weather's mild highs in the 70s, not the 90s of July, and crowds are thinner. You joke that forgetting to book would be like showing up to a kiva ceremony without an invite, awkward, and you're stuck outside with no sacred stories. Next, you pack smart. Sturdy hiking shoes are non-negotiable. Those trails we hiked to Spruce Tree House and Balcony House are steep, rocky, and not kind to flip-flops. A reusable water bottle is a must, remembering how we hauled clay jars from canyon springs. The park's 7,000-foot elevation can leave you parched. You toss in a hat and sunscreen. Mesa Verde's sun is no joke, unlike the shady alcoves we loved. The visitor center, just past the park entrance, is your first stop with maps, exhibits, and a short film on the Ancestral Puebloans, grounding you in their story before you hit the trails. You plan to spend a day, maybe two, to cover key sites without rushing. Cliff Palace and Balcony House need those guided slots, but Spruce Tree House with its 130 rooms often allows self-guided walks if conditions are stable, a chance to linger in the courtyards where we danced. You can almost feel the cool stone under your hands, the same stone we touched in those bustling village days. For a special treat, you add the Petroglyph Point Trail to your list, a 2.4-mile loop on Chapin Mesa. Your guidebook mentions a quirky detail: the trail's ancient petroglyphs, spirals, handprints, and animals like those we traced in the Four Corners glow faintly at dusk, visible only in the low light. You schedule a late afternoon hike, hoping to catch that fleeting magic, imagining the ancestral Puebloans carving them under similar skies. The trail's moderate, but the elevation hits hard, so you plan to pace yourself, unlike our cliff-climbing ancestors, who'd probably chuckle at your out-of-breath huffing. For lodging, you book a room at Farview Lodge 15 miles inside the park, or consider camping at Moorfield Campground, where starry nights remind you of the skies we gazed at over Cliff Palace. Either way, you're close to the action, ready to wake up with the canyons. Visiting Mesa Verde isn't just about seeing sights, it's about treading lightly. The preservation efforts we explored started in 1906 and strengthened by UNESCO in 1978 let you walk where ancestors did, but they come with rules. Stick to guided tours. Don't touch walls or pick up corn cobs like the ones we marveled at in Cliff Palace, and stay on trails to avoid eroding the 52,000 acres we hiked. The park balances access with care, capping tour sizes to protect fragile stones from the wear of thousands of footsteps. But here's where the scholars pipe up. Historians still argue whether tourism should be further limited. Some say the 300,000 annual visitors, each eager to see Cliff Palace, or squeeze through Balcony House's tunnel risk damaging sites faster than rangers can repair, pointing to cracked stones and worn trails. Others argue sharing the ancestral Puebloans' legacy tied to modern Pueblos, as we learned, is worth the risk, inspiring respect and connection. It's a tightrope, like inviting the world to your grandma's house without breaking her china. Let's lock in the main historical fact. Visiting Mesa Verde requires reservations for guided tours of major cliff dwellings like Cliff Palace and Balcony House, ensuring preservation while allowing access to over 600 sites built between 1190 and 1260 CE. These tours, managed by the park, connect visitors to the ancestral Puebloans' world from kivas to petroglyphs. I'll be real, planning this trip makes me itch to grab my boots and go, but I'd probably trip on that Balcony House ladder and end up as a cautionary tale. And missing those dusk petroglyphs, that'd sting worse than forgetting my sunscreen. As you finalize your plans, the canyon's pull grows stronger, promising a connection to the ancestral Puebloans, their fields, their kivas, their spirit. You can't shake the excitement standing where we stood, touching the past, your heart racing at the thought of a story that's still alive, whispering in every stone and star. You're sprawled on your couch in 2025, a bowl of popcorn, maybe a nod to that ancient ancestral Puebloan snack we chuckled about during our farming days, sitting on your lap as you scroll through streaming apps on a lazy Friday night. The ancestral Puebloans, whose cliffside world we've lived through, in Mesa Verde's canyons, are no strangers to the screen. From the kivas where we prayed to the black-on-white pots we crafted, their story captivates modern audiences, popping up in everything from nerdy documentaries to wild sci-fi conspiracies. They're often called Anasazi in these tales, a name we've used alongside ancestral Puebloans to respect their descendants. But not every portrayal gets it right. You're about to dive into how these cliff dwellers shine in popular culture, their legacy both celebrated and stretched like a shadow dancing on a canyon wall under a flickering fire. You start with the serious stuff, clicking on PBS's The Mystery of Chaco Canyon, a documentary that zooms in on Mesa Verde's cliff dwellings like Cliff Palace, with its 150 rooms and 23 kivas we toured. The film digs into their architecture, those sandstone blocks we watched being set, and the trade routes we followed carrying turquoise and macaw feathers. It leans on tree ring data, like the dendrochronology we geeked out over to pinpoint the 1275 CE drought that drove their abandonment. You feel a tug of familiarity seeing the Three Sisters crops we planted highlighted as proof of their farming smarts. These documentaries, grounded in the archaeology we explored, bring the ancestral Puebloans to life, showing their resilience in a way that feels like flipping through a family album of the cliffs we called home. You can't help but nod along proud that the real story, corn clans and all, gets some airtime. But then you stumble into quirkier territory. You queue up an episode of Ancient Aliens and oh boy, it's a ride. The show spins a wild tale, the ancestral Puebloans' sudden departure, which we puzzled over was because of extraterrestrial contact. Those petroglyphs we traced in the four corners, spirals, handprints, figures. Apparently they're alien calling cards, not ritual symbols tied to rain or ancestors. You burst out laughing, picturing an ancestral Puebloan elder, rolling their eyes at a UFO landing in their cornfield. This quirky idea, born from the mystery of their abandonment, ignores the drought and conflict clues we found, like burned rooms and skeletal trauma. It's fun to watch, like a sci-fi bedtime story, but you know those petroglyphs were more about praying for rain than hailing little green men. Fiction takes it even further. You browse a novel, People of the Mesa, where ancestral Puebloan heroes battle drought and rivals their lives, echoing the clans we met, organizing village tasks. The book's got drama, think forbidden love in a kiva, with a chase scene through balcony houses, tunnels we crawled. It's gripping, but it leans hard into romance and adventure, less on the daily grind of grinding corn or weaving yucca. On TV, The X-Files tosses the name Anasazi onto a shadowy conspiracy group, playing on their vanishing to fuel mystery vibes. You smirk knowing they didn't vanish but migrated, their legacy thriving in Hopi and Zuni communities we connected with. These stories are thrilling like a blockbuster version of Mesa Verde, but they blur the line, turning real people into myths for plot twists. Here's where the scholars start grumbling. Historians still argue whether media portrayals do the ancestral Puebloans justice or sensationalize their story. Documentaries like PBS's get a thumbs up for sticking to archaeology, pottery bones, tree rings, and tying to modern pueblos, keeping the narrative grounded. But fictional spins from alien theories to swashbuckling novels can overshadow the truth, reducing cliff dwellers to exotic props or mystery fodder. Some say these tales spark interest, drawing folks to visit Mesa Verde, like the trip you planned last time, inspiring respect for their ingenuity. Others worry they dilute the real story, the resilience of a people who built Cliff Palace, farmed in deserts, and carried their culture through migration. It's like choosing between a history lesson and a popcorn flick. Both have their place, but one's closer to the heart of the cliffs. Let's lock in the main historical fact documentaries, like PBS's The Mystery of Chaco Canyon, feature Mesa Verde's cliff dwellings built 1190–1260 CE, highlighting their architecture and culture, while fictional media often portray the ancestral Puebloans with creative, less accurate spins. These portrayals from books to TV shape public views, but vary in fidelity to the archaeological record. I'll be honest, munching popcorn while watching Ancient Aliens is a guilty pleasure, but I'd rather not explain to an ancestral Puebloan why their kivas now an alien landing pad. If I tried writing their story, I'd probably mess up the pottery designs and get a lecture from a clan elder. As the credits roll on your screen, you lean back, the glow of Mesa Verde's canyons lingering in your mind. The ancestral Puebloans are more than alien theories or adventure tales. There are people whose real story, from cornfields to cliff homes, deserves the spotlight. You can't shake the urge to tell their tale right, picturing starlit alcoves and wondering how you'd capture their spirit without the Hollywood haze. You're back in Mesa Verde National Park, Topamive, standing under the sweeping alcove of Cliff Palace as the evening settles in the air, cool and sharp with the scent of juniper. The 150 rooms and 23 kivas loom above their sandstone walls, catching the last light, a quiet reminder of the ancestral Puebloan world we've lived, planting corn on mesa tops, crafting black-on-white pots, chanting in kivas. But around these cliffs, myths swirl like dust in the wind, clouding the truth. The biggest tall tale, that the Anasazi vanished without a trace, their empty homes a riddle for the ages. You're about to sift through these misconceptions, separating fact from fiction, to honor the people whose legacy we've traced to modern pueblos, each truth a step closer to the real story that's been whispering to us all along. Let's tackle the elephant in the canyon, the mysterious disappearance myth. You walk through Cliff Palace's silent rooms, remembering the eerie stillness we felt when we learned they abandoned these dwellings around 1300 CE. That 1275 CE drought we tied to their departure, drying springs and starving fields, left a mark, no question. But the idea that they just poofed out of existence, pure fiction. You recall the archaeological clues we unearthed: pottery shards, skeletal remains, tree ring data, all pointing to migration, not magic. They didn't vanish. They moved, heading to fertile rivers like the Rio Grande or Little Colorado, where their descendants, the Hopi Zuni and other Pueblos, carry their culture forward, as we saw in their living legacy. Yet, pop culture loves the mystery. Shows like Ancient Aliens, which we had a good laugh over last time, spin tales of alien abductions or mystical exits, ignoring the migration evidence. You smirk, thinking an alien getaway sounds like a wild party, but it's about as likely as you nailing one of those yucca baskets we fumbled with cute idea, zero chance. Then there's the name itself, Anasazi. You've heard it tossed around in documentaries, books, even the X-Files, we chuckled at. But it's a Navajo word, often translated as ancient enemies, or sometimes ancestors. Here's the rub. Modern Pueblo peoples like the Hopi and Zuni prefer Ancestral Puebloans, a term that honors their direct connection, like the Hopi's word Hisatsinom we learned about. Calling them Anasazi isn't wrong. It's been used in archaeology for ages, but it's like calling your cousin by their childhood nickname when they have outgrown it. You feel the weight of that choice, knowing the term carries baggage. A reminder of the clans and kivas we saw tying communities together. Some myths go even wilder, like one you stumble across claiming cliff dwellings were built high to escape massive floods. You glance at the arid canyon floor where we hauled water from trickling springs and can't help but laugh. Floods were the least of their worries in this bone-dry desert. Those cliff homes, as we learned, were more about defense or climate, not dodging imaginary rivers. Here's where the scholars start sharpening their pencils. Historians still argue whether the name Anasazi should be retired for good. On one side, it's baked into a century of research books, papers and signs. At Mesa Verde use it tying to the artifacts we explored from corn cobs to petroglyphs. Changing it could muddy historical records like renaming a classic song halfway through. On the other side, Ancestral Puebloans respects the living descendants whose stories we connected with, acknowledging their voice in a way that feels right, like choosing the Hopi's Hisatsinom over a term with enemy vibes. It's a debate as prickly as a cactus balancing tradition with sensitivity, and there's no easy answer when both sides have a point. You can almost hear the academic arguments echoing off the canyon walls, each side digging in like they're defending a kiva. Let's lock in the main historical fact. The ancestral Puebloans didn't disappear, but migrated by 1300 CE to regions like the Rio Grande, their culture continuing in modern Pueblo communities, debunking myths of a mysterious vanishing. Archaeological evidence from pottery to tree ring data confirms this, grounding their story in reality over fiction. I'll be real, sorting through these myths makes me glad we've got the facts straight. Aliens and floods sound like a fun movie, but they're no match for the real story of migration and resilience. If I tried spinning a tale about Cliff Palace, I'd probably accidentally say they invented popcorn machines or something equally ridiculous. As you sit under the alcove's curve, stars starting to peek through the dusk, you feel the truth settle in. The ancestral Puebloans didn't vanish. They adapted their culture, enduring in the songs, dances and stone walls we've followed, to modern Pueblos. You can't shake the question what myths might cloud your own story centuries from now. For now the canyon's quiet holds the real tale, shining brighter than any tall tale, its stars winking like they've known the truth all along. You're crouched in a bustling courtyard in Cliff Palace, 1200 CE. The morning sun creeping into the alcove, warming the sandstone walls, as the scent of roasting corn wafts from a small fire. The ancestral Puebloans, whose world we've lived through Mesa Verde's cliffs, are gathered around their hands, busy preparing a meal. A woman grinds corn, another stirs a pot, and a kid munches on something that looks suspiciously familiar. This isn't just breakfast, it's the fuel that powered life in these 150 rooms and 23 kivas from the Mesa top fields we tended to the trade routes we followed. You're about to dive into the flavors of their diet, tasting the mix of staples and surprises that kept them strong, each bite a window into the resilience we have seen from cornfields to kivas. Let's start with the stars of the show The Three Sisters. You kneel beside the woman at her metete, the stone's rhythmic scrape, a sound we know well from our grinding days. She's turning dried corn into fine flour, the kind used for tortillas mush or tamales, a staple that filled bellies every day. You can almost taste the warm, slightly sweet tortillas, like the ones we imagined sharing in those courtyard gatherings. Nearby, a clay pot, black on white, like the ones we crafted, simmers with pinto and Anasazi beans, their earthy aroma mingling with the corn. Beans rich in protein were a perfect partner, grown alongside corn in those clever fields we planted. Squash, the third sister, is roasting over the fire, its flesh soft and nutty, or stewed in chunks for a hearty dish. You help scoop out seeds which are toasted for a crunchy snack, a little gift from the plant. These three sisters, as we learned, weren't just food, they were a system sustaining the 100 or so people who called Cliff Palace home. But the diet wasn't all farming. You glance at a man preparing strips of rabbit meat, likely from a hunt we joined, drying it for storage. Deer and turkey, those gobbling friends whose feathers we wove into blankets, added protein when the hunt was good. Wild plants filled the gaps, piñon nuts, their rich buttery bite a favourite we gathered in the canyons, yucca fruit sweet and chewy, and prickly pear if you could dodge the spines. You wince, imagining a spine in your finger, joking that it's nature's way of saying, earn your snack. These foraged foods found in archaeological digs were like the seasoning on a dish, adding variety to the Three Sisters base. You picture a meal: tortilla, bean stew, roasted squash, a side of dried rabbit served in a courtyard under the alcoves, curve, the kind of spread that'd make any cliff dweller proud. Here's a quirky standout: amaranth seeds. A child hands you a small pile, tiny but packed with protein, a superfood before influencers coined the term. You try them, their nutty crunch a surprise like a cliffside energy bar. Amaranth was popped like the popcorn we laughed about during our farming days, or ground into flour for stews, its traces found in Mesa Verde's storage rooms. It's a reminder of their knack for finding power in small things, like turning a seed into a meal. But life wasn't always a feast. You remember the 1275 CE drought we tied to their abandonment, when fields withered and springs dried, forcing reliance on stored corn and foraged greens. Those lean times etched in the skeletal remains we studied, show the diet's limits when even amaranth couldn't stretch far enough. This brings us to the scholarly debate historians still argue how varied the ancestral Puebloan diet really was. Pollen samples and coprolites, yep. Ancient poop found in digs reveal a rich mix when rains were good corn beans, squash wild plants, and game like the meals we're imagining now. Bones show protein from rabbits and deer, suggesting a balanced plate in good years. But other remains with signs of malnutrition like weakened bones hint at scarcity during droughts, especially in the late 1200s. Was their diet a bountiful spread or a tightrope walk between abundance and hunger? The evidence swings both ways, like balancing a water jar on those ladders we climbed, leaving scholars to puzzle over a menu that changed with the seasons and the skies. Let's lock in the main historical fact. The ancestral Puebloan diet centered on the three sisters corn beans and squash, supplemented by hunted game, like rabbit and wild plants, like piñon nuts, sustaining communities like Cliff Palace around 1200 CE. Archaeological finds from seeds to bones confirm this mix, revealing both ingenuity and vulnerability. I'll be honest, sitting here with the smell of roasting corn. I'm hungry just thinking about it, but I'd probably burn my tortilla and end up with a very sad stew. If I tried popping amaranth, I'd likely set the alcove on fire. As you share a warm tortilla, the fire's glow on your face, you taste the ancestral Puebloans' brilliance, turning desert scarcity into sustenance. Their diet, simple yet strategic, powered a culture that thrived in these cliffs and lives on in the pueblos we connected with. You can't help but wonder, what do your own meals say about your story? For now, the courtyard's warmth holds you the flavors of the cliffs, a reminder of a people whose legacy is as rich as their harvest. You're tucked into a small room in Cliff Palace, 1200 CE. The alcove's shade cooling your skin as the morning sun creeps over the canyon's edge. The air hums with the soft rustle of a loom, and the faint scent of sagebrush drifts up from the four corners landscape we've wandered. An ancestral Puebloan woman sits before you, her fingers deftly weaving yucca fibers into a sandal, each twist as precise as the black-on-white pots we crafted. In this world we've lived, planting corn on mesa tops, chanting in kivas, hunting rabbits, clothing and adornments were more than just what you wore. They were survival against the desert's bite, a badge of who you were and a canvas for beauty. You're about to slip into their wardrobe, from rugged sandals to shimmering beads, each piece a thread in the vibrant tapestry of cliff life. Let's start with the basics everyday wear. You try on a pair of yucca sandals, their fibers tough, but surprisingly comfy, built for the rocky trails we trudge to those mesa top fields. They're like the ancient equivalent of hiking boots, perfect for dodging cacti and scrambling up ladders like the ones we climbed into Cliff Palace's 150 rooms. Men typically wear breechcloths or short kilts woven from cotton that came through the trade routes we followed to Chaco and beyond. Women opt for wraparound dresses, simple rectangles of cotton or yucca, tied with sashes loose enough for grinding corn or weaving in the courtyard. When the desert nights turn chilly, both wrap in blankets made of turkey feathers, like the ones we saw women crafting their softness a warm hug against the cold. Here's a quirky twist, some blankets, belts, and even sashes were woven with human hair braided for extra strength and insulation. You can't help but joke that it's like wearing your family's hand-me-downs literally with a side of "I'm keeping you close." Archaeological digs in Mesa Verde have turned up these textiles showing a wardrobe designed for the arid up-and-down life of the cliffs. Now let's talk bling, because the ancestral Puebloans had style. You run your fingers over a necklace of turquoise beads, each one polished to a sky blue sheen, traded from mines in the southwest we learned about on those bustling trade routes. Shell pendants, carried from the Pacific coast hundreds of miles away, dangle alongside their pearly glow, catching the firelight in your room. Men and women alike sport earrings, often bone or stone, or tie their hair with carved ornaments, adding a spark to daily tasks like stirring bean stews we tasted last time. You spot a woman with a turquoise hair tie, her braids swinging as she works, and it feels like a quiet flex, a way to say I'm connected, I'm proud. These adornments found in burials and rooms across Cliff Palace weren't just for show, they tied you to the trade networks, to your clan, maybe even to the spirits we honoured in kivas. You can almost feel the weight of a shell pendant, wondering if it held a story like a locket with a memory inside. But here's where things get murky. Did clothing and jewellery signal who was who in the village? You notice a man with a particularly intricate necklace, its turquoise and shell beads more elaborate than most. Could he be a leader like the elders we saw guiding tasks, or just someone with a flair for fashion? Historians still argue whether clothing marked social status. Finer items like rare macaw feathers from Mesoamerica or imported shells we saw in trade often show up in burials, hinting at rank may be worn by those who led ceremonies in the kivas we sat in. But turquoise beads and simple cotton tunics were common, found across Cliff Palace's 100 residents, suggesting everyone got to shine a little. The evidence is mixed, like trying to guess who's the boss at a family reunion. Fancy jewellery might mean you're in charge, or you just really like sparkly things. Scholars keep digging, but the cliffs hold that secret tight, as layered as the sandstone itself. Let's lock in the main historical fact. Ancestral Puebloan clothing included woven yucca sandals, cotton tunics, and turkey feather blankets with jewellery like turquoise beads and shell pendants reflecting trade and expression, suited for life in Cliff Palace, around 1200 CE. Archaeological finds from textiles to beads confirm this practical yet artistic wardrobe. I'll be honest, trying on these yucca sandals makes me respect their weaving skills. I'd probably tangle the fibres and end up with a very sad flip-flop. And wearing a human hair belt. That's a bold choice I'm not sure I'd rock. As you slip off the sandal, the alcove's quiet wraps around you, the looms rustle fading. The ancestral Puebloans' clothing and adornments weren't just about staying warm or looking good. They were a story woven and worn of a people who thrived in these cliffs, whose legacy we've seen in modern pueblos. You can't shake the question, what does your own style say about you centuries from now? For now, the canyon's stillness holds their spirit, each bead and fibre a whisper of a life that still sparkles under the stars. You're tucked into a bustling workshop in Cliff Palace, 1200 CE. The alcove's cool air brushing your skin as the morning light filters through the canyon. You're holding a metate, a heavy stone slab worn smooth from grinding cornet's surface, telling the story of countless meals. The room hums with activity. A man naps a flint blade, a woman works a loom, the sounds blending like a quiet symphony of ancestral Puebloan life. This is the world we've lived from planting the three sisters on Mesa tops to weaving turkey feather blankets in Mesa Verde's 150 rooms. These tools, metates, knives, bows, weren't just things. They were the backbone of survival, turning cliffs into homes and canyons into larders. You're about to explore the gear that powered their daily grind, each piece a marvel of practicality and craft forged in the rugged heart of the four corners we've wandered. Let's start with the heavy hitters. You grip the metate paired with a mano, a handheld stone used to grind corn into the flour we turned into tortillas in those courtyard feasts. It's no lightweight 30 pounds or more, a serious arm workout we joined when we knelt beside the women grinding in Cliff Palace. You can almost hear the scrape, feel the dust on your fingers, the rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. Across the room, a man sharpens a flint knife, its edge so fine it could slice through the rabbit hides we hunted in the canyons. These blades, chipped from local stone, were multi-tools cutting meat, shaping wood, even scraping yucca for the sandals we slipped on last time. You admire a loom, its wooden frame taut with cotton threads weaving breechcloths or the wraparound dresses we wore each pass of the shuttle, a testament to the hands that clothed a village. You can't help but joke that trying to weave one yourself would probably end in a tangled mess like attempting origami with a rope. Then there's the star of the show, bows and arrows. You pick up a bow, its sinew-string, tight, stone-tipped arrows leaning against the wall ready for a hunt, or to defend the alcove's 100 residents. Adopted around 500 CE, these replaced older spear throwers, revolutionizing hunting and protection in Mesa Verde's rough terrain. You imagine an archer's steady aim, a skill we glimpsed tracking rabbits, the arrow's flight as precise as the solstice-aligned doorways we marveled at in Cliff Palace. These bows, made from juniper or yucca and backed with sinew, were light but lethal, their stone points crafted with a precision that could rival a modern scalpel. You feel the bow's tension, picturing a hunter in the canyon's shadow, and realize why they were a game changer, like upgrading from a flip phone to a smartphone, same job, way better results. Here's a quirky detail that stops you. Some tools like metates and knives have etched designs, spirals, lines, even tiny figures found in Mesa Verde's archaeological digs. They're like mini petroglyphs, the ones we traced on canyon walls but carved into the tools themselves. Were they art, a way to claim ownership, or just a touch of pride like signing your work? You grin, joking. It's like doodling on your laptop during a meeting, same creative itch, way cooler, canvas. These decorations, rare but telling, show the ancestral Puebloans didn't just make tools. They made them theirs, infusing utility with a spark of personality. You can almost see a woman pausing to etch a spiral on her mano, her smile as quiet as the alcove's shade. But how good were these tools really? Historians still argue over their advancement. Compared to Metal Age cultures, they look simple. No iron, No wheels, just stone, wood, and fibre. Yet their effectiveness is undeniable. Flint knives could cut as cleanly as steel. Metards ground corn for hours without breaking. Bows took down deer with deadly accuracy. They were perfectly tuned to the desert's demands from the cliffs we built into the fields we farmed. Some scholars call them basic, pointing to the lack of complex machinery. Others argue they were brilliantly advanced, designed with a deep understanding of the environment, like a Swiss army knife for cliff life. The debate's as layered as the sandstone with no clear winner, but you lean toward the side that sees genius in simplicity, like crafting a home from the canyon itself. Let's lock in the main historical fact. Ancestral Puebloan tools around 1200 CE included metards for grinding corn, flint knives for hunting, and looms for weaving, with bows and arrows adopted around 500 CE for hunting and defense. These tools found in Mesa Verde digs were essential for life in Cliff Palace, reflecting adaptation to their environment. I'll be real, handling a metart makes my arms ache just thinking about it. And if I tried knapping flint, I'd probably end up with a pile of sad pebbles and a Band-Aid budget. But there's something awe-inspiring about these tools, the way they turn stone and wood into a thriving world. As you set the metate down, the workshop's hum fades, but the tool's legacy lingers, tying to the trade routes and kivas we explored, the modern pueblos we connected with. You can't shake the question: what tools shape your own life, and what story do they tell? For now, the alcove's quiet holds the ancestral Puebloan spirit, each tool a testament to a people whose ingenuity still echoes in the cliffs. You're standing at the edge of a Cliff Palace alcove, 1200 CE, the canyon below shimmering under a midday sun that bakes the red sandstone. The air is parched, carrying the faint, sharp scent of sagebrush from the Four Corners landscape we've roamed. An ancestral Puebloan passes by, balancing a clay jar brimming with spring water, their steps careful on the rocky ledge. In this arid world we've lived, grinding corn on metates, weaving yucca sandals, praying in Mesa Verde's 150 rooms water was more than a resource. It was life itself, a precious gift, tamed with ingenuity and grit. You're about to dive into how they managed water from springs to clever dams, each drop a lifeline for their crops, their community, and the story we've followed through these cliffs. Let's follow the flow. You trail a group down a narrow path to a spring trickling from the canyon wall, its faint gurgle a sound we caught when we hauled water for those Mesa-top fields. These springs, like the ones we saw nourishing the Three Sisters crops, were the heartbeat of Cliff Palace, chosen as home for their reliable flow. You kneel to fill a jar, the water cool against your hands, its weight a reminder of the labour we joined, lugging it up ladders to cook or drink for the alcove's 100 residents. The guide lets imagine a wise elder explains how they built near these springs, ensuring every household, from the kiva dwellers we sat with to the potters we watched, had access. You can't help but respect the planning, like picking a house with a built-in fridge, except this fridge was a canyon wall that never stopped giving. But springs alone couldn't feed the fields. We worked high on the mesas where corn beans and squash grew. You climbed to a field, spotting a check dam, a low wall of stacked stones like a miniature version of Cliff Palace's walls we saw built. These dams slowed runoff from the rare desert rains, letting water soak into the soil instead of racing away. You marvel at their simplicity, like a net catching every precious drop before it escapes the canyon's grip. Some mesas had reservoirs, shallow basins dug into the rock and lined with clay storing extra runoff for dry spells. Archaeological digs have found these clay linings cracked but stubborn, tying to the black on-white pots we crafted with the same care. You picture a farmer, maybe one we weeded alongside checking a dam's stones, their hands as steady as when they planted seeds. Back in the alcove, you're handed a storage jar, its surface smooth and heavy, holding enough water for a family's day. A quirky detail stops you. The rim is sealed with pignon pitch, a sticky resin that locks in the water, preventing evaporation in the desert's relentless heat. You run your finger along the seal, imagining it keeping water fresh for weeks, a trick found in Mesa Verde's storage rooms. These jars, some big enough for gallons, were hauled up those creaky ladders we climbed a feat that makes your arms ache just thinking about. You joke that carrying one without spilling would earn you a cliffside gold medal way tougher than your morning coffee run. This system, Springs Dam's jars, worked like a charm when rains came, feeding Cliff Palace's fields and families, the kind of meals we savoured in that courtyard with roasted corn and beans. But even genius has limits. You remember the 1275 CE drought we tied to their abandonment when springs slowed to a drip and fields withered, as tree ring data showed us. Those check dams caught less, rain reservoirs cracked, and storage jars emptied faster than they could be filled. The skeletal remains we studied with signs of malnutrition tell the story of a system stretched thin, when even amaranth seeds from our diet couldn't bridge the gap. Historians still argue whether these water systems were sustainable. In good years, they were a marvel, supporting Cliff Palace's 100 souls with enough to drink, cook, and grow. But the drought's long shadow lasting decades suggests they weren't built for such extremes, like a car running out of gas on a desert highway. Some say the systems were robust, pointing to centuries of success. Others argue their reliance on rain made them vulnerable, a debate as tricky as balancing a water jar on a ladder's rung. Let's lock in the main historical fact. Ancestral Puebloans managed water using springs-check dams and pitch-sealed storage jars, sustaining Cliff Palace around 1200 CE in the arid Four Corners. Archaeological evidence from clay-lined reservoirs to storage jars confirms these methods vital for their crops and community. I'll be honest, just thinking about hauling a water jar up a cliff makes me need a nap. And if I tried sealing one with pitch, I'd probably glue my hands together and call it art. But there's something humbling about their water management, the way they wrung life from a desert's stingy grasp. As you sip from the jar, the water's chill grounding you, you feel their brilliance, a spark that lit the kivas and pots we cherished, the modern pueblos we connected with. You can't shake the question, how would you survive in such a thirsty land? For now the alcove's quiet holds their victory, each drop a testament to a people who made the canyon bloom, their legacy as enduring as the springs they cherished. You're perched on a narrow ledge in Cliff Palace 1200 CE, the canyon below cloaked in shadows as dusk settles over Mesa Verde. The alcove's 150 rooms and 23 kivas stretch behind you, their sandstone walls glowing faintly, a fortress cradling the 100 residents we've called family, grinding corn on metates, weaving yucca sandals, chanting in kivas. The air feels tense, tinged with the faint crackle of a watchfire and the distant howl of wind through the 4 corners we've roamed. You sense the ancestral Puebloans' vigilance, their eyes scanning the horizon for threats. Conflict, whether from within their clans or beyond the cliffs, was a shadow on their lives, and you're about to explore the signs of struggle and defense, each stone, each scar a whisper of survival in a world we've lived so deeply. Let's start with the architecture, because Cliff Palace isn't just a home, it's a stronghold. You squeeze through a tight passage like the ones we crawled through in Balcony House, so narrow your shoulders brush the walls. These choke points were no accident. They slowed intruders, giving defenders time to react. The alcove itself, high above the canyon floor, is a natural bunker reached only by those creaky ladders we climbed, easy to pull up if trouble came. You duck through a doorway barely 2 feet high, remembering how we had to crouch in those cozy rooms. They weren't just for warmth as we thought when we first arrived, they forced attackers to stoop vulnerable to a quick jab from a bow we handled in the workshop. You spot a tower near the alcove's edge, its walls thicker than most, maybe a lookout or a last refuge, like a medieval keep built with the sandstone blocks we watched being set. You can't help but joke that living here was like signing up for a castle with a killer view great until someone tries to crash the party. The clues get darker when you look at the archaeology. You recall the skeletal remains we studied some, with chilling marks, cut marks on ribs, fractured skulls, signs of violence that linger like a ghost. These weren't accidents. They point to conflict, maybe raids from rival groups eyeing the springs we hauled water from or the fields we tended. Burned rooms like the charred beams we puzzled over during abandonment add to the story. Were they torched by enemies? Or did the ancestral Puebloans burn them themselves, a ritual to close their homes, as they left the 1275 CE drought? We tied to their exodus, likely fanned the flames of tension when water and corn ran low, as we saw in those lean diets. Desperation could turn neighbors into foes. You picture a family huddled in a kiva, the same ones we sat in praying for peace, as shouts echoed outside, a scene as heavy as the canyon's dusk. Here's a quirky clue that catches you: petroglyphs like the spirals and hands we traced in Mesa Verde's canyons include rare images of warriors, angular figures clutching shields, some with bows. You find one on a nearby cliff, its lines stark against the rock, a glimpse of a martial side we haven't seen much of. Were these boasts of strength warnings to outsiders or prayers for protection etched with the same tools we admired? You grin, joking. It's like ancient graffiti screaming, "Don't mess with Cliff Palace." But the stakes were no laughing matter. Survival hung in the balance. These carvings, though few, hint at a culture ready to defend its alcove, its springs, its 3 sisters' crops we grew with such care. But how bad was it really? Historians still argue whether conflict was a constant shadow or just occasional sparks. The evidence leans both ways. Trauma on bones may be 1 in 10 skeletons, shows violence and burned structures found in sites like Cliff Palace scream real danger, especially in the late 1200s when drought squeezed resources. Defensive designs, from narrow passages to high towers, back this up, suggesting the ancestral Puebloans built with threats in mind, maybe from neighbouring villages or wandering bands. Yet those trade routes we followed bringing turquoise and macaw feathers show years of peaceful exchange like the pottery swaps we marvelled at. Was conflict internal clans clashing over the last drops of water or external with outsiders raiding for corn? The mix of cooperation and violence, like the kivas and courtyards we gathered in, holds both stories a balance as shaky as a ladder's top rung. Scholars keep digging, but the canyon guards its secrets. Let's lock in the main historical fact. Ancestral Puebloans used defensive architecture, like narrow passages and high alcoves in Cliff Palace, to protect against conflict with skeletal trauma and burned structures suggesting violence around 1200 CE. These signs found in Mesa Verde point to a need for defense, possibly tied to drought-driven scarcity. I'll be real, standing here with the canyon darkening below gives me the chills, like waiting for a storm, might come. If I had to guard an alcove, I'd probably trip over a ladder and accidentally wave a white flag. But there's something fierce about their resilience, the way they built and fought to protect their home, their legacy we've seen in modern pueblos. As you scan the horizon, the alcove's silence feels heavy. The watchfires glow, a faint comfort. You can't shake the question, how often did they fear the night and how did they find the strength to keep going? For now, the cliffs hold their answer, each defensive stone a testament to a people whose spirit burned brighter than any threat. You're standing in the heart of Cliff Palace's alcove, 1300 CE. The canyon below cloaked in twilight's soft purple, the air still and tinged with the dusty scent of sandstone. The 150 rooms and 23 kivas around you, once buzzing with the ancestral Puebloan life we've lived. Grinding corn on metards weaving turkey. Feather blankets chanting in kivas are now silent. Their fires cold, their doorways dark. A faint creak from a forgotten ladder echoes, and the weight of departure settles like dust on your shoulders. This isn't the end of their story, but a turning point, a moment when families left these cliffs for new horizons. You're about to witness the final chapters of their life, in Mesa Verde tracing the migration that carried their spirit forward, a tale of resilience we followed through the Four Corners' rugged embrace. You wander through a deserted room, your sandals scuffing on the packed earth, and spot a clay pot sitting alone in a corner, untouched, as if its owner meant to come back. These ghost pots, found intact in Mesa Verde's archaeological digs, are a quirky hallmark of abandonment, a whisper of haste, or perhaps a ritual farewell. You can almost see the woman who shaped its black-on-white spirals like the ones we crafted, setting it down before leaving. The reasons for their exodus are heavy layered, like the sandstone we watched being stacked. The 1275 CE drought, pinned down by the tree ring data we explored, was a beast decades of dry springs, like the ones we hauled water from, and withered fields where we grew the Three Sisters. Skeletal remains with the malnutrition and trauma we studied paint a grim picture of hunger and conflict, maybe raids over the last drops of water or corn. Those burned structures we puzzled over, scattered across Cliff Palace's rooms, could mark attacks like the ones we tied to defensive towers, or a ceremonial torching to close this chapter. You feel the strain drought parching the land soil depleted from centuries of farming. We join tensions flaring in the crowded alcove we called home. Staying wasn't just hard, it was impossible. Where did they go? You picture families stepping out of the alcove, their yucca sandals and turquoise beads we wore packed in baskets, their eyes set on new lands. The migration wasn't a single dramatic march, but a gradual flow, some leaving early, others clinging to the cliffs until the end. Archaeological clues, pottery styles, kiva designs show them heading south and east to the Rio Grande's fertile banks, or west to Arizona's Hopi mesas, places with rivers and allies from the trade routes we followed carrying turquoise and macaw feathers. You imagine a group pausing at a canyon's edge, checking one last check. Damn, we built their hearts heavy but hopeful, trusting new lands would hold their future. These new homes weren't empty, evidence of shared pottery and rituals like the kivas we sat in links them to the modern pueblos we connected with the Hopi and Zuni, whose stories echo Cliff Palace. Some left in haste, abandoning ghost pots and flint knives we handled. Others planned their exit, taking tools and seeds, a mix of urgency and strategy, like packing for a move with no return address. Here's where the scholars lock horns. Was this a collapse or a strategic transition? Standing in these silent rooms with their cold kivas and scattered corn cobs, we marveled at. It's easy to see failure, a society crumbling under drought, conflict, and hunger. The burned beams, the trauma on bones, the deserted fields scream loss like a city evacuated mid-crisis. But zoom out, and the story shifts. The modern pueblos whose dances and cornfields we tied to this legacy are proof of survival, a culture that bent but didn't break. Pottery styles carried South oral stories like the Hopi's Hisatsinom we learned about, and continued kiva rituals show a people who adapted, finding new rivers to replace the springs that failed. Some argue it was a collapse, pointing to the chaos of violence and starvation. Others see a transition, a bold pivot to greener lands, like a farmer replanting after a bad season. The truth, like the ladders we climbed, holds both loss and resilience, a balance as delicate as a ghost pot left behind. Let's lock in the main historical fact. The Ancestral Puebloans' final migration by 1300 CE saw them leave cliff dwellings like Cliff Palace for regions like the Rio Grande and Arizona driven by drought, conflict, and resource depletion. Archaeological evidence from pottery to kiva designs confirms their culture's continuity in modern Pueblo communities. I'll be honest, standing in this empty alcove feels like the end of a long book and I'm not ready to close it. If I had to pack up and leave Cliff Palace, I'd probably forget my favourite pot and trip over a ladder on the way out. But there's something powerful about their choice, not a fall, but a step into a new chapter carrying the spirit we've seen in every kiva, every cornfield. As you linger under the alcove's curve, stars peeking through the twilight, You feel their strength, their migration, a testament to a people who didn't just survive but thrived. You can't shake the question, what would you carry into a new beginning? For now, the canyon's silence holds their answer, a legacy that shines beyond these cliffs, as enduring as the stars above. You're seated on a rocky outcrop in Mesa Verde National Park 2025, the night sky unfurling above like a velvet blanket, stars twinkling over Cliff Palace's silent alcove. The cool air brushes your skin, carrying the faint whisper of sagebrush from the canyons we've wandered. Below the 150 rooms and 23 kivas, where we lived as ancestral Puebloans, grinding corn on metates, weaving yucca sandals, praying in kivas under the same stars, feel both distant and achingly close. This journey through their world, from the sun-scorched fields of the Four Corners to the living legacy of modern pueblos, ends here, but their story lingers woven into the cliff's quiet strength. You're about to reflect on their enduring impact, letting the canyon's wisdom guide you into a gentle close, each star a nod to a people whose spirit shines as brightly as the night above. Let's take a moment to look back. Cliff Palace, with its intricate sandstone walls we helped stack, and its kivas, where we felt the pulse of ceremony stands. As a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a beacon drawing thousands to Mesa Verde as we planned in our visitor's guide. Its architecture, high alcoves, solstice-aligned doorways, we marvelled at narrow passages, we crawled shows. A people who turned desert cliffs into thriving homes. Their three sisters, crops the corn beans and squash we planted, fed communities like the 100 souls here sustained by the check dams and pitch-sealed jars we managed through thirsty summers. You recall the turquoise beads we wore, the black-on-white pots we crafted, the ghost pots we found in deserted rooms, all threads in a tapestry of trade and migration that stretched to the Rio Grande and Hopi mesas, as we saw in their legacy. A quirky detail twinkles in your mind. Some petroglyphs, like the warriors and spirals we traced on canyon walls, align with constellations. Orion the Pleiades, a celestial map still guiding archaeologists' telescopes today. You smile, imagining an elder charting stars from this very cliff, as if the sky itself held their kiva prayers, a cosmic echo of their resilience. Their story isn't without shadows. The 1275 CE drought we tied to their migration, drying the springs we hauled water from left fields barren and pushed families to new lands. Skeletal remains with the trauma and malnutrition we studied, and burned rooms. We pondered hint at conflict and struggle scars of a world stretched thin. Why did some leave ghost pots intact, as if awaiting return? Why were some beams charred? Historians still debate whether we'll ever fully unravel these mysteries. Each dig uncovering a flint knife we handled or a corn cob we marvelled at adds a piece, but the puzzle feels like it's missing a corner, forever teasing us with questions. Yet these gaps don't dim their light. The ancestral Puebloans didn't collapse as we debated, they adapted, their culture blooming in the Hopi elders' stories, the Zuni potters' spirals, the kiva dances we linked to Cliff Palace. Their resilience, softer than the sandstone we touched, stronger than the drought's grip, carries their legacy forward, a quiet hum in the canyon's heart. As you settle against the cliff legs tucked beneath you, The stars grow brighter, their light a gentle hum over Mesa Verde's vast canyons. The ancestral Puebloans' world feels close, almost tangible, their hands shaping clay pots, their voices rising in kiva chants, their footsteps fading into new lands by the Rio Grande. You let the journey sink in cornfields under scorching suns, ladders swaying under careful feet, the quiet of an alcove at dusk. Their story isn't locked in these cliffs. It lives on, vibrant in the Hopi elder's tale of Hisatsinom, the Zuni potter's spiral echoing a petroglyph, the visitor tracing a warrior's shield under starlight. You breathe slowly, deeply the night's calm, wrapping you like one of those turkey feather blankets we wore warm and soft against the desert chill. The mysteries why they left what stars they followed don't need solving tonight. They're part of the canyon's song, a melody of resilience that hums in your heart steady and sure. Let the wind carry their whispers, the sagebrush's scent, lull your thoughts, the stars cradle your dreams. You're not just a visitor here, you're a keeper of their light, a thread in their story woven through time's gentle hands. As your eyes grow heavy, the cliffs fade into shadow, their edges blurring like a memory held close. You drift the night's embrace, soft as a kiva's glow, knowing their legacy endures a quiet promise under an endless sky. Sleep now held by the canyon's peace, their spirit a soft echo in your dreams, guiding you gently into rest.